This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate second part of What If Minato Befriended Goku. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
Son Goku was overjoyed. To be honest, he was shocked that his heart hadn't burst yet. Since he had arrived here, everything had gone his way. Still, it wasn't all that different from what he was used to at home. It was a lot of fun to be 13 again in this village with all of its complexities, mysteries, and vibrant residents. The people, the old landlady, Kodonoa.ba.san, and her irascible attitude toward all of her tenants, or whippersnappers, as she referred to everyone except him, were already loved by him. Every time he visited, he was greeted with a cautious but sincere smile from the different street vendors who sold him various vegetables and other items. He particularly loved Mikazuki.san, the owner of the grocery store, who was always ready with his crate of instant ramen packets at 8 o'clock in the evening. Even after the mindless gluttony, his training left him with a hole inside that would not go away. It was quite unbelievable that a child so small could eat so many times his own body volume. The adrenaline rushing through his body, pushing every muscle to its limit, made him love training more than anything else. He didn't care where the strength to move the next enormous boulder came from. He also liked Ichiraku's free dinners. The man had now hired 3 apprentices and installed a ramen extrusion machine. Now his business was booming. Everything in a week. Goku was approaching the ridiculously high levels of fitness Kushina demanded of him, and his parkour times were at an all-time high. It took 12 seconds to get from Market Central to headquarters, and 15 seconds to get from his apartment to the training grounds. As a punishment for slacking off, Kushina had actually clapped for that final accomplishment and, as the Saiyan blushed, she had ordered 5,000 push-ups. His body was developing nicely. Every plank, every kunai drill, every intricate seal combo he executed made him feel stronger. Only a few lingering echoes of that incident even crept to the surface of his consciousness, and his mind felt nearly clear as well. He still needed to work on his jutsus and chakra control. He wasn't as prodigal as he thought he would be. He did his best, but this was not something that could be learned in 3 days. Goku dismissed that idea like a stray fly. Not as prodigal as he had anticipated. His conscience was slightly troubled by that, but he had pushed it to the back of his mind to think about another day. He was going to fight today. Phew, he said as he accompanied Namikaze Minato to the meeting with the 3 Genins. When he finally got it right, he was eager to put his skills to the test against people who had been ninja training since they were old enough to walk. Yes, Minato and the girls did count, but they never used all of their ninjutsu because they kept saying that it would be too much for him. It had been so far. In a hand fight, he could defeat any opponent, but he was worthless against the manipulation these men employed. He had been eagerly awaiting the opportunity to establish himself among people his own age and in a position closer to his own. Which was insignificant. Goku saw the trainees for the first time as the lawns appeared and the road gently sloped downhill until it reached the trees. His face suddenly turned red when he noticed the person standing slightly apart from the other 2. He had witnessed Goku knee himself in the face as a child. To put it mildly, it had certainly not been him at his best. He most certainly did not want Minato to know. Goku had a few seconds to come up with a respectable excuse for that embarrassing moment because he wasn't currently facing them. They got close enough for him to start racking his brains. He could see the corners of the gray-haired child's mouth, even though his face was turned away from him. The grin must have been incredibly broad. He is aware. Goku was at the end of his rope. Now there was no turning back. He started, Minato. His eyes widened in surprise as gray spikes turned. It was obvious that Goku was not what he had anticipated. The silence seemed to be broken by the ringing of the bells. On the way over, Goku intended to ask Minato what those bells were for, but he had missed the chance. I suppose I'll have to find out when these 3 do. He gave his forehead a mental slap. Give up elevating yourself to a unique level. In the eyes of the village, I am a bigger nobody than anybody else. Instead, I am no one. Gray Spikes was looking at the bells with a kind of spiteful intentness, as if he knew what they meant. Goku's heart rate increased in anticipation as Minato paused for effect. This morning was going to be ideal. Minato reached into a pouch on his flak jacket and pulled out a sheet of paper. The whole thing appeared to be composed of bulges and zippers, making it difficult to identify which. He unfolded it and pronounced 3 names. Obito Uchiha. Nohara Rin. Hitaki Kakashi. Are you 3, I presume? They all nodded. Minato's expression abruptly deteriorated. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Care to say something out loud this time round? None of the 3 could care less. Yes, they said. The person on Goku's left gave off a sinister aura. He shivered, turned his head, and started to perspire. Minato the demon was back. It could not be mistaken. The two canines that were visible from beneath his curved lips appeared strangely sharper than normal, and those deep blue eyes were like glowing embers. I still did not hear you. Long-term, clear enunciation. One more indication that Minato's Vesuvius was going to blow up. And the dark soil of Pompeii buried the three children before him up to their necks. Goku wasn't exactly anticipating that response when he turned to face them. They all gave off the impression that they were a little bored and unconcerned with their Jonin. Sensei's ire. Yes, screamed the masked one, rolling his eyes. The other two did the same. Although Minato appeared somewhat placated, he wasn't happy with the eye rolling either. And, all right, he added. There were hesitant nods in response to the statement. The three of you must be feeling quite proud of yourselves, aren't you? Don't be. The children started at the savage, spat out words. The girl and the other child were suddenly struck. They started to realize their predicament. Goku recalled Minato's irate expression in the Hokage's quarters. Two of the three were receiving Jingle Bell enemas that day, as far as he was aware. Suppressing a big swallow, he reminded himself that it was two of the four. This day was not going to go well. Absolutely not. Minato went on, each word coming out crisp and clear. I will proceed to make you three little shits rue the day you ever thought becoming a shinobi was an achievable thing, Minato said. When I'm done with you three, by the time you even muster the courage to write the Academy's test again, hell will have long since frozen over. You should have already realized that probability has played a cruel trick on you, a cruel trick indeed. Except for the child with the gray hair, everyone had already turned white. In general, Konoha shinobi were very friendly and kind. Typically, would.be genin received fair but rigorous treatment. Even with the worst of Jonin. Sensei, such sporadic threats were unprecedented. But Kakashi was accustomed to a lot of hate. In addition to random, ambiguous insults, he no longer even registered threats of death. Yes, dude, please just get it over with. Nobody is afraid of you. Hitaki Kakashi cast a scornful glance at the fools going crazy over sporadic outbursts of rage. Well, at least not me. He regained his concentration. The fact that Minato said, your job is to take these two bells from me by any means necessary. I definitely don't think anyone will succeed anyway, given you're utterly pathetic. Oh, let's call them abilities, annoyed Kakashi, who didn't really care. He could also see the idiot in Rin growing agitated. That's at least something we have in common. The brilliant man with the gray hair just wanted to finish this and move on to his training. He was aware that everyone with comparable familial circumstances ended up at the Anbu, where he was destined to be. He was about to enter the ruthless world of Konoha's spying organization. Naturally, one comes to the realization that trivial, pointless things like peer competition and such were never important. That the face kid has my support. That way, I wouldn't have to put up with those annoying people I know. Perhaps Rin isn't so horrible after all, he added, almost as an afterthought. He looked at his opponent quickly. At first glance, Minato appeared to be just another Jonin. He was composed and self-assured, and every tenketsu in his body exuded a chakra aura. However, Kakashi surmised that he was more. The Hokage wouldn't arbitrarily assign two of this year's top pupils to this man. Obviously, if they could see past his foolish, irate side, he had a lot to teach them. Hold on. What? He hadn't given a damn, so he hadn't noticed it until then. Minato's aura was similar to that of the child beside her. Unless a person had more chakra than he knew what to do with, that level of seepage was uncommon. Thus, the child also has a lot of chakra. After that incident, however, it was difficult to give the child in general any real attention. He did, however, observe how naturally he wore the sword that hung at his hip. It appeared to be an appendage or a component of him. In a moment, his hand appeared poised to decapitate and draw. The odds were increasingly in his favor. Anyway, Kakashi braced himself for battle after old Mini finished his dramatic monologue. What's his name and Rin also appeared to be on guard. The child had adopted a taijutsu stance, but Kakashi didn't like how anticipatory and defensive it was. Be my guest if you wish to act like a coward. It appears that you will still receive a bell. Minato was in the most exposed, obviously provocative pose. Even the idiot was able to spot the holes in his blatantly phony defenses. His moniker was accurate. The idiot launched an attack. He suddenly sprang forward, swerving to the left and right in turn. He abruptly made a clone as he got closer, altering his trajectory to give the impression that he had disappeared. Kakashi mentally accelerated the scene. Because of the step he'd taken just before creating the diversion, the retard would reappear to the left. His position of attack would be near the periphery of Minato's field of vision, based on his sprint speed and the duration of his clone. Not even mediocre would do. To leave Obito sprawled on the ground, Minato would need to block the direct kunai to his face and then return with a nice cross counter. Excellent. No kunai was thrown by Obito. Unusually thinking, he dashed inward and radially, his torso already lowering to avoid the anticipated blow. Even Kakashi had to concede that it wasn't bad. The idiot has some capacity for thought. Good. However, that will only give him 5 more seconds of life. In any case, it will end here with a simple rising kick to the jaw. Rasengan. Obito flew backwards as the full force of the attack struck him in the chest. After traveling nearly 100 meters in a straight line, he crashed into a tree at the edge of the training area. He fell limp to the ground after peeling off the trunk. Forget about fighting for the bell. That was probably the last chance he would ever get back up for the following week. Kakashi's eyes popped as he stared. What the devil just took place? For a while, Minato remained in his place, purposefully communicating with the other 3. His smoldering, fierce eyes made it very evident that he would not hold back in the slightest. Rin's mouth was open in a silent scream, and she had taken an uncontrollable step back. Although he appeared less agitated, the other child's expression was still one of surprise. Not even he had expected this. Obito's back was still visible in the distance. His shirt had been torn. The remaining chakra from that attack had torn off the Uchiha emblem. Kakashi forced himself to look away from his fallen teammate and turned around. His pupils widened in surprise. Minato caught him. Kakashi's punch struck his solar plexus, causing him to suddenly experience excruciating pain that spread throughout his entire abdomen. His lungs were forced to exhale. He stumbled backward, struggling to breathe. He wasn't even given that opportunity by Minato. Minato appeared to be about to kill him as he took a step forward, the Rasengan already forming in his other palm. Literally. Kakashi's eyes picked up on the chakra patterns as the attack drew closer. Each particle's motion was too erratic to discern clearly, and they were a whirling ball of chaos. He braced himself for discomfort. Much suffering. The assault was never successful. Kakashi didn't remember shutting his eyelids, so he pushed them open. Rin was standing in front of him. He wanted the exact girl eliminated from the competition. The energy that held the Rasengan's shape together had been naturally dissipated by her skillful use of a series of chakra infused prods. The whole thing just fizzled away into nothingness without that crucial centripetal force. He had been saved by Nohara Rin, most likely without anticipating anything in return. He had seen her from afar quite a few times. It always felt like she was the type of person who would do that. The fact that she was willing to do this for him shocked him. Kakashi felt something deep inside his head. A feeling he had never known. In a way, it was both familiar and unfamiliar. Am I feeling thankful? Even though Goku had the ideal vantage point to watch the entire disaster unfold, his body remained motionless. Too immobile to take action. Too immobile to protect those helpless kids from his teacher's insane, misguided rage. He knew that today would be a game of survival and that there might not even be 2 winners at the end when he finally got it to act and started to move cautiously and methodically in Minato's direction. Minato, what exactly are you playing at? Rin exhaled a breath of exhaustion as Goku watched. She must have been worn out. It must have taken a tremendous effort to release that much raw power without the boy she was protecting even smelling it. When Minato's hands moved, Goku saw with horror that he had drawn 15 specially made floating kunai from the numerous pockets of his jacket and was ready to attack with brutality. Goku didn't require any additional motivation. He was right beside the pair after 2 chakra infused steps, and he was holding his black blade already. Minato began. It was the most difficult barrage he had ever encountered. When they were training together, Minato seemed to have suppressed 90% of his power. It was a fresh, overwhelming barrage of assaults. Every opening Minato could find had a blade aimed at him, and 3 or 4 more were coming from arbitrary, planned locations where he thought the Saiyan would be in a moment. Goku gave it everything he had, but to no avail. He became aware of his inadequacy. Every block drained his energy, and every dodge left him feeling worn out. It was not surprising that Minato's physical limitations decided to show during this battle because this was Minato at his best. Goku briefly paused his constant staring at the blades to meet his sensei's eyes. In some way, something seemed different. Uncertain of what it was, he was startled into action by the glint in Minato's eyes, which sent a primal wave of fear through his spine. He couldn't help but have fun as he avoided the following attacks. This kind of testing brought back memories of better days. He recollected his early years. He recalled how things used to be through the fog of his confused recollections. Master Roshi's training, obtaining the special stone with Krillin, and defeating General Dao after Korin taught him the holy water's secrets. Yes, those were the times when he battled to establish his worth and risked his life to defeat rivals who shared his goals. There was no real antagonist, no lone megalomaniac destroying entire planets because he was a bitter loser. It was just like his last week here, or rather, those times were just like his last week here. But before he knew it, things started to shift, too slowly for him to notice at first. He was deeply repulsed by his enemies' vile intentions and increasing cruelty as they grew more powerful. In order to obtain those 7 wish-granting spheres, retarded villains were willing to do anything and everything. Additionally, there were some even more insane criminals who came specifically to murder him. As if a foolish resentment were that important. Oh, how pitiful. Being given this opportunity made him very happy. It was impossible for the Saiyan to keep up with one of Konoha's fastest in what was undoubtedly one of his weakest forms, even with all of that and ignoring the fact that he had improved significantly over the past week. As the kunai continued to arrive, Goku soon began to grow weary. His parries became more awkward, and suddenly the situation was altered. All it took was a slack, half-hearted counter. Minato slashed with a 4th and 5th kunai at his unguarded sword arm after channeling 3 at the poorly positioned blocking arm. Minato's 3 weapons sliced through muscle and sinew with ease. Wincing in pain, Goku pulled back. The black blade fell to the floor, and his arms fell limp to his sides. This did not sit well with the Saiyan. He was becoming increasingly irritated by this constant barrage of brutal battles. He laughed in spite of, or perhaps because of, the dire circumstances. He recalled laughing just like that. Nostalgia crept into his mind. So many times, just like that, he'd put away so many vicious, strong foes. And now he was being humbled by someone whose most powerful attacks were incomparable to the weakest of his former abilities. He marveled at the irony of the situation as he knelt down to dodge under the horizontal twin slashes of 2 more kunai. He had anticipated that the next move would be the culmination of the current attack pattern. Goku knew enough was enough when Minato brought 1 kunai vertically downward while holding a Rasengan in his other palm. At least in terms of his fights, he had been acting very strangely the entire time. Even though he only occasionally dove into that pool, he had left the impression of a vast, unrealized potential. Because of this, Kushina and Makoto had not only maintained their interest in him but also prevented them from recognizing his true strength. Regardless of how much stronger he had become, he consistently displayed an improvement commensurate with his training. Throughout the first 3 days, this had been his standard procedure. However, the obvious flaws in that plan later became apparent. After that, his progress slowed significantly, and at times, he had to train by himself in his room to maintain the gradient he had initially set. Furthermore, Kushina had become aware of the situation. Consequently, the last 3 days of Goku's training had become even more taxing on his back. Goku relished it greatly, but he also began to regret that he wasn't even living up to his own lower expectations. Even though he still enjoyed taking on challenges head-on, they now made him feel bad. He wasn't really at fault. With a wave of a magic wand, a body that had atrophied for God only knew how many millions of years could be immediately restored to its original shape. He was still far behind in his training, and the fact that he had let himself get into this situation, allowing Minato to complete it, was a sign enough of how utterly powerless he was right now. Internal conflict and turmoil erupted as he saw the pincer combination of chakra and kunai closing in. He quit pretending and stopped caring about how he came across to other people. Keeping his hands in the all-2 familiar position, he focused, opening more chakra conduits with sheer willpower and using some of it to move his dead arms, akin to a madman manipulating puppets. He practically flooded the tenketsu between his palms, forcing the chakra through it rather than allowing it to leak out naturally. He glanced up at his opponent as he added the necessary rotation. He was horrified to discover that he was out of time to finish his Kamehameha. He was also unable to move his arms an inch. Right now, the attack was too shaky. Any errors would result in an explosion that would impact him much more than Minato. His eyes darted around, looking for something to protect himself. Just behind him, they caught the sudden, dark glint of his sword. Even though it's essentially what saves my life, I never imagined I'd need to use it. He shifted and slid his tail out. He was distracted by a shriek before it broke free of his lower garment. "Watch out!" Rin called out. Goku's attention was diverted by the abrupt sound. The blade was close to him. It was at his chest, ready to stab him in the heart. Chakra was already tearing through his skin as the Rasengan reached his abdomen. Goku experienced an increase in pain, from a bothersome itch to excruciating agony. As it started to get intolerable, Goku felt a sharp tug and a sharp crash of weakness over him. His tail was being pulled by someone holding on. Goku was yanked straight out of the attack trajectories with another powerful pull. He skidded slightly on the grass after landing rather forcefully. He closed his eyes even though his wounds weren't bad enough to cause him to faint completely. I suppose a minute's rest won't be an issue. Uchiha Makoto was astounded by what she saw. It was impossible what she had seen. Never in 1,000 years. Minato Namikaze had lost his mind. The Minato she knew would never make it this far, but she recalled the resentment he had toward the Hokage for this foolish task. This was extremely harsh. It was sheer torture. She couldn't bear to see these unfortunate kids go through any more pain. But because of Kun's condition, she remained there, terrified. He had expressly instructed her to avoid interfering in any way, regardless of the circumstances. He gave her that in return for her attending his trial covertly. She had agreed because, at the time, she couldn't think of anything that would require her to show herself, much less interfere. She was confident that Goku would win a bell and do it in a way that would make even his defeated rivals cheer. For her son Kun was a fair person of that sort. His very presence made her happy and reassured. The dark, obscured eaves of the Uchiha enclosure stood in stark contrast to this. There was something off about Minato's eyes. They shone with a glint of pure malice, rather unnatural. Makoto was aware that the Jonin with the yellow hair was incapable of feeling such a thing. She activated her Sharingan and looked for indications that he had used Genjutsu. Almost immediately, she found one. It was positioned in the most visible spot, directly in the temple's chakra flows. It had easy access to the mind because of this, but it was equally easy to detect. Amazing. Very impressive. It appeared as though the user had just disregarded the limitations that Genjutsu typically had. For Genjutsu, there were two prerequisites. First of all, it was ineffective on someone whose chakra circulatory system had been purposefully stopped. Second, there was a limit to the amount of mind control you could exert over someone and still maintain their fighting skills. Like it was nothing, this one broke that limit. Minato's physical and mental faculties were all at their peak, and it appeared that the enigmatic user also had total control over his free will. She gave a headshake. Playing, "Who just beat the Sharingan?" wasn't appropriate at this moment. Not yet. It was necessary to save son Kun. For the time being, he was safe, but who could predict what Minato would do next to annihilate the three unfortunate kids? However, she did have to honor her vow to stay out of the way. Please, 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 finish this. He needs to be saved. Oh, this is wonderful. Just amazing. Pure ecstasy was the sensation of the raw, unmolded chakra gushing out of Goku and onto his face. Orochimaru moistened his lips slowly while flitting his forked tongue out. The child was a reservoir of unrealized potential. He became aware that Uchiha vessel was no longer necessary each time he witnessed him churn out that much chakra for any move. Even though the Sharingan was very skilled at dojutsu, the Uchiha lacked the chakra necessary to maintain it for extended periods of time. It was a trivial answer. He would use the child, ideally a few years older by then, as a vessel for his soul after the last details of his body altering attempt at immortality were finished. It would only take time to acquire the powerful eyes later, considering his immense strength and chakra. His entire plan was going to be slowed down by waiting for the ideal Uchiha to arrive, so why not wait in a stronger, healthier body? He needed a replacement as soon as possible because of the kind of abuse he'd given his current one. In any case, he used this insignificant detail to gauge the child's potential for the future. He was long past the limits of conventional genjutsu. Additionally, Jiraiya was able to obtain even more cooperation than he had anticipated by taking advantage of the favorable mental state that his yellow-haired protege was in. These undeveloped minds are such weak instruments. Orochimaru nearly spat in disdain. So completely useless. Aside from his own, the only mind he had come to recognize was that of the fabled Uchiha ancestor, the one. Uchiha Madara had a unique perspective on the world, and even though he lacked the resources to realize it, Orochimaru was still shivering at the prospect of what his vision for humanity might hold. What did the genius receive in exchange for all those elaborate plans and grand stratagems? Nothing. All because of that opponent, who was also incredibly strong and a retarded do-gooder. A single human body was too weak to support the soul for more than a very short period of time, as Orochimaru had long since discovered. But some of the research he was doing was going to take a very long time. He had started experimenting with a new method to guarantee his survival. He wouldn't have to worry about his plans being carried out if this strategy succeeded. But he needed a test subject for a trial run. One with enormous chakra reserves, to make up for the amount lost due to mistakes and inexperience. A Neanderthal mind, of course. In front of him, the test subject was lying. The Neanderthal analogy is extended even further back in the evolutionary timeline by the fact that it also had a tail. In disgust, Orochimaru wrinkled his nose. Monkeys have always irritated me. Ironically, I would want to live in one. Kakashi was fully aware of the reason he had acted out of character by saving the monkey boy. Basic instinct for survival. He needed everyone he had, because no one could win on their own. In the same motion, he had taken his short sword and saved the child. With just one blade, it was physically impossible to repel 15 kunai without getting hurt. It was essentially a battle of attrition once he managed to get a few cuts on your desperately blocked other arm. Furthermore, Minato was undoubtedly skilled at pressuring the child into making those errors. He was powerful, no doubt, but his strength was being undermined by his inability to control his chakras, his lack of combat experience, and his insane need to always strike back harder rather than smarter. I detest these brain losers because of this. He glanced at Rin once again. She remained rooted to her place. She was trembling, even from a distance. Is it too much to ask for even basic level headedness, man? Feelings. One more argument against the child's shortcomings. He was already analyzing the situation as he drew his own blade from behind his back. The child was just taking a breather, based on his whispered words. For at least a few minutes, he had to repel Minato's advances. He made the decision to give him 2. Even though it required a nice sword point to the ass, it was wakey. Wakey time after that. Don't you think that would hurt? For a millennium or more? Silently laughing, he took hold of both hilts and swung them to test his equilibrium. Despite being the larger of the two, the black one was somehow lighter. Almost immediately he saw the chakra hole. Well, Thus, dual wielding was always intended. He balanced the two swords' weights, providing the necessary difference. To prevent the chakra from accidentally escaping and deflecting the mass during a maneuver, he used a miniature seal to place a stopper on the hole. He could see the intent to kill in Minato's eyes. This was a Jonin at its strongest, then. Kakashi couldn't help grinning. He began to move in the direction of his adversary. He continued to monitor Rin and the child in his peripheral vision as he traveled the distance. At least Rin appeared more realistic. She was overcoming her sluggishness and slowly assuming her position. As 3 kunai shot out from above Minato's head and made their way toward him, he snapped back into focus. Minato was just experimenting. Kakashi used both blades to cut. The halves flew off in all directions as he sliced straight through the metal. Near Obito's head, one of them slammed itself into the earth. He leveled the sword at Minato's face and lowered it. Come. The challenge caused his Jonin Sensei's eyes to enlarge in a humorous manner. However, 3 more blades had replaced the ones Kakashi had cut, and he was already there a millisecond later. The disparity in skill quickly became apparent, and he felt the pressure. Blades made of dark metal suddenly appeared and juggled around his torso, circling like vultures over a dead animal. Now that he had 2 swords, Kakashi knew he could hold them at bay, but he couldn't produce the same kunai. Splitting swing because there were blades everywhere. Minato intensified his assault even more. The number of kunais had increased to 17. He needed to try to thin the herd a bit, but he had no room. In an attempt to give his swing more momentum, he whipped his right arm back. Suddenly, Minato's eyes flashed. Kakashi's arm felt like it was pulling a boulder through mud as he attempted to perform the movement. When he glanced back, he noticed that the sword behind his head was held in place by 10 blades bearing down on it. He told himself that there was no need to become agitated. He has 7 swords, and I still have the other one, hold on. What the hell? He was still facing the front with 17 kunai. Avoiding them with a single sword would be a bit annoying. Kakashi abruptly stepped away from the blocked sword. He dropped to his haunches and picked it up again just before it hit the floor, watching Minato closely at every turn. Before he knew it, the blades were on him. In imitation of the spinning bamboo toy kids used to play with, he cocked his wrists and held out the 2 blades opposite one another. Rising on his heels, he powered upwards, fanning out the blades to cover the area around him as he spun on the pivot created. Minato's special kunai was torn to pieces as the swiftly spinning blades tore through its weak spots. He got out of the spin, went on into the air, and aimed. He would once more encounter Minato in the final half turn. His only choice was to use one of the swords as a javelin. If given a choice, the black option would have to be selected. He broke the seal and continued to add chakra until the centrifugal force caused the wrist tendons to scream in agony. He resealed the hole after pushing until he was certain he could add no more without actually moving the bones. The final 90 degrees of turn were painfully slow due to the adrenaline. In an effort to get a better look at his target, he turned his head and whipped his neck. The key was accuracy. Then all at once it wasn't. A Rasengan was located directly in his chest. Kakashi concurrently skewered his Jonin Sensei through the abdomen as the attack connected. The flak jacket, skin, and muscle underneath felt insignificant in comparison to the sword's sheer weight, which cut right through it. It slid farther inwards without any hindrance, emerging from Minato's torso on the other side with hardly any slowdown. A tiny explosion was produced before the Rasengan lost its shape and broke apart. Kakashi's sleek fingers slipped off the dark black hilt as he was blown back. The weight did not change because the seal was still in place. He was powerless to stop it. A smile came to his face. The weasel then pops. Hold on. The fang. The weasel. The fang. It's the weasel. A pair of dull thuds were heard. The first was when Minato was unable to move further and the still moving hilt crashed into her chest. The yellow-haired Jonin was driven to the ground by the momentum transfer, which struck him like a hammer. Then, with the front of his garments torn and scorched by the Rasengan's destructive force, Kakashi fell heavily. Nohara Rin was only interested in one. She reached his fallen body, hands already thrown in front of her, sprinting full speed. She dropped to her knees and held the gray-haired teen's head in one arm while covering the bleeding torso with the other hand, which was permanently tarnished by the distinctive spirals. Because that was the attack's curse, which Minato had created. What made it such a weapon was its relative simplicity in comparison to other jutsus of equal power. She couldn't stop a tear from forming in her eye. It was all her fault. Kakashi-kun would have had no trouble taking Minato Sensei out whenever he felt like it if she had acted sooner when she saw him getting ready to jump while holding the Rasengan. She felt even more guilty because she had been a huge liability. During her time at the academy, she had witnessed this genius's outstanding and, most importantly, reliable performance completely overshadow the grading system. Even the cruelest and most cynical teachers had to admit Kakashi-kun's talent. Rin was fiercely competitive, but she had lost faith that she would truly outperform him in anything. His exuded confidence just affected the grades of everyone else. Even so, she would have placed second in the academy, nearly matching Kakashi and far ahead of the others. They had gained recognition as genins after 3 arduous years, people who would boldly put the needs of the village before their own. Why was he so far ahead of everyone else and only finished second in the class? What was the purpose of all the hours she had spent training? If she couldn't turn that training and knowledge into real outcomes, what was the point? What was she to do now if there wasn't any? The response was obvious. She approached Minato after carefully setting Kakashi's unconscious, barely breathing body down on the grass. Pulling out the bells, she reached into his bloody jacket. The abundant bloodshed had not yet reached them. They shone in the sunlight. She picked one of the two and tossed it in the direction of the gray-haired prodigy's body. There would be no more fighting for him today. In the back of her mind, something was happening. It was a low, unintelligible voice. Despite her efforts to push it away, it returned, stronger than before. I forgot. Don't forget. What, am I overlooking something? She gave a headshake. She must have been experiencing a figment of her imagination. She started to return to Kakashi. He had to get medical help quickly or he would undoubtedly die. When she got to the pale-faced boy, she took him in her arms and began pulling him toward the medical center, which was a long way from the isolated training grounds. Rin went on, but Kakashi moaned at the abrupt movement. A little discomfort is preferable to total crippling right now. Don't bother. She turned to look at the voice and stopped dead in her tracks. The child was just getting up and was obviously having trouble. Rin was astonished. Would he be able to stay conscious after confronting a Jonin? Although Kakashi-kun had prevented his death, he had previously suffered much more serious wounds. He ought to have been in a comparable state. He moved his weight into a less painful position and grunted. He raised his arm slowly and used his thumb to indicate something behind him. Still lying there, like a corpse, was Obito. When Rin realized what she had forgotten, she let out an audible gasp. Rin nodded and carefully set Kakashi down on the ground. He took the brunt of the attacks. The next few Rasengans were far weaker. You should probably see to him first, Rin said. She looked at him as she hurried by, and he added, and don't worry about taking him anywhere. Someone's already taking care of that. He was gazing into a random area of the bushes. Were they being observed by anyone else? The real question was how many people had been watching, but that was clear. She didn't slow down at all as she got closer to the tree. His vitals were far worse than the other two combined, and she could tell that just by looking at him. She put her ear to his mouth while bending down. It was just what she'd been afraid of. No breathing. Already, Obito's lips were blue. He needed to be revived, and he needed it now. Before stopping to tuck a lock of hair behind her ear, she walked over his face. She knelt down and held his mouth open, the way she'd been taught in those first aid courses. She didn't even think about the consequences of her next move. Nohara Rin's only thought was that she would be able to get back to Kakashi. Kun sighed sooner if she could get Obito breathing on his own. It was a very savage and blatant way of thinking, but at least it spared you the awkwardness of kissing someone directly on the lips. As she broke lip contact, she saw the Uchiha's lungs rise and then fall as she exhaled violently. He had simply stopped breathing as a result of severe shock, according to that. He still had a steady pulse, but it was weakening with each beat as more blood seeped from the cuts and gashes on his chest. She went on, still watching the rise and fall of his chest. She didn't realize her initial object of concern had woken up because she was too focused on keeping her nakama alive. The real fuck, the aforementioned subject was Shell, shocked. Goku limped over to him. He comforted him by saying, "She's just giving him first aid." His face softened considerably. He smiled at him sarcastically and resignedly, then hobbled over to Minato's body. With surgical accuracy, he grasped the sword in his right hand and withdrew it. No more blood loss, no more damaged tissue. He was too exhausted to continue. He dropped alongside it, the blade still heavy. "Come back soon, Makoto." The alarm sounded frantically. Kushina squeezed her eyes shut and used her pillow as an earplug to block out the noise. She had today off. And the previous evening, she had neglected to switch off the fucking alarm. Why'd I act in such a foolish manner? Speaking of foolishness, Minato had persuaded her to allow him to test his genins alone with his godforsaken sweet talk. She had no idea how he had done it, but the next thing she knew, he was putting her to bed and telling her that her day off would be pleasant. But the most important thing had not been done by that fool. Conveniently, he had also neglected to switch it off. She rubbed her eyelids drowsily and sat up. An artist's wet dream was her slim figure, there in the mid-morning sunlight, in her loosely hanging nightgowns, with the rays catching every strand of disheveled, bed hair. She turned and used her fist to smash the clock's snooze button, destroying any illusion that the Uzumaki was attractive. She opened one eyelid to take a quick look at the time. 9:30 was displayed on the face. It was 3 hours after her regular time. She shuffled to the nightstand, a little bewildered, and picked up the now destroyed object. A note was affixed to the rear. She picked it off and began to read. "I suppose that means good morning. How is your day off going? Had a good night's sleep? Hee. I apologize for the alarm, but it's crucial. You can now come meet my genins if you're still interested. You can come play good cop and tell them they've passed since I'm probably done failing them all by now. Minato, love." That part was obviously a statement of the obvious rather than an afterthought. She got up to change, chuckling at her boyfriend's deceit. Indeed, she was not going to be a good cop. Not even close. There's a very good reason why the red-haired devil was given that name. Since she was. Minato's hell is nothing compared to the hell I'll show you. You simply wait. So, your mission for today is to find Haramaki, Sans cat. Despite 3 horrified faces staring back at him, Sarutobi Hiruzen remained expressionless. A little to their left was Kushina. She shot them a homicidal look and silenced them, making them into docile, if a little sulky, 13-year-old outpatients. They left the hospital in a rather eventful fashion. Random replacements were found under the sheets by the on-duty nurse. Like the slothful fool he was, Obito was still sprawled out on the bed, snoring happily. Using the transformation jutsu, Kakashi had created a human skeleton that resembled his own. Rin had done the same thing, turning a pillow into her sleeping head and filling the sheet with a tiny chakra bubble that gave the impression that someone was underneath it. The caricature on Goku's pillow, which was unquestionably not his face, was what the nurse had found most unsettling. A pink pill was used as chalk to draw it, and it remarkably resembled the nurse's vision of a teacup pig's wet dream. The search party was led by Kushina, who discovered the 3 idiots training in the same area where they had been beaten, determined to get as much training as they could. Rin was going 2-on-1 with the 2 boys. In the battle, they had suffered far more damage than she had, and her only admitting symptom was extreme exhaustion. The 3 chose to depart one day prior to Rin's early discharge because they were so competitive. She had concluded that these 3 would undoubtedly return to the infirmary with even more severe injuries if they were not watched. She had led them directly to the Hokage's quarters and demanded that the 3 complete every D-rank mission currently available while being supervised by her. You children and your careless actions. Sarutobi Hiruzen was on the verge of losing his temper. Even though they were healthy enough to be given a mission, these stragglers were unaware of how fortunate they were to be alive. Additionally, he was furious at their blatant disregard for their sensei. who was lying in the intensive care unit with his chakra totally depleted from the torrent of Rasengans he had recklessly unleashed. Yes, that idiot subject was once more a question. He calmed himself by taking several deep breaths while trembling with anger. Now was not the moment to get worked up. Telling them that they were inexperienced and unprepared to handle anything else was not the appropriate course of action at this time. Not so soon after the incident, in particular. After all, he was meant to provide the ostensibly traumatized trio with unwavering support. The village had been a whirling mass of rumors, hearsay, and controversy in the week after the blonde Jonin's unusual outburst. It was like the debris left over from a shipwreck. It appeared that everyone had a different account of what happened. Some claimed that Minato was finally losing it due to the stress of being a young Jonin. Others denied it, claiming that those brats were the ones who deserved a little, to use polite language, disciplining because they were ungrateful enough. Some even claimed that the Uchiha were involved, claiming that they were able to almost kill a member of their own clan in order to advance their agenda in the village council. The worst of them was a moron who said that Minato harbored personal animosity toward Kakashi because he had been receiving favors from Kushina. Hiruzen had never before heard such utterly scandalous, utterly baseless rumors. Hiruzen had dismissed them as soon as he heard how absurd they were, and all of this was bullshit. The administration and leadership of the village had nothing to do with a mere training test. Yes, when a messenger had told him about Minato's most recent adventures, he had been utterly incensed. Hiruzen was aware that Minato had no desire to play on a team. He was aware that any test he planned to administer to those three unfortunate genins would be a complete, humiliating ordeal that would leave them all crying, muddy, and nearly dead. He had no idea how far Minato had gone beyond even this liberally drawn line. They were shinobi, after all, and even if you ignore their strategic and military value, they were the very people of Konoha. The Sandaime found it hard to accept that the kind, devoted Minato, who always spoke so passionately about how important the village and its residents were to him, would so heedlessly and cruelly play with the lives of 4 children. They were genins, and 13-year-olds at that, regardless of their talent. It was too ideal to be a mere coincidence for this kind of thing to happen so soon after the boy's entrance. When he showed up, something changed. He claimed to have no history or backstory. Hiruzen had accepted it at face value at the time. Now, however, he had to speak to the child immediately after what had transpired. And if Uchiha Makoto's unexpected visit hadn't caused him to change his mind, he would have done just that. Hokage-sama, I assure you that he had nothing to do with this. When he continued to be doubtful, she described the test in detail, showing how he initially seemed normal before becoming increasingly menacing and finally turning into the violent, Rasengan throwing freak during the actual fight. Also, she thought, why would he go through the trouble of causing this, and getting hurt himself in the battle? If he was really controlling Minato's actions, wouldn't he try to avoid injury? On that point, the Sandaime had to give in. Unless the child was a huge masochist, there was no reason to harm themselves. But then, what was he aware of about him? He had pawning the responsibility onto Minato's shoulders, taking it lightly, but now it appeared that the yellow-haired Jonin wasn't totally trustworthy either. What if he had been wearing the genjutsu in that forest? Not by Goku, of course. There was no way to pretend that his tenketsu were open at the time. Who else might it be? Perhaps someone who was keen to ruin the 18-year-old's chances of winning the coveted job Hiruzen was about to give him. It undoubtedly significantly reduced the number of suspects on the list, because the Sandaime's retirement was only known to a small number of people. The likelihood of this occurring in the near future was extremely low. The terrible fallout from the Second Shinobi War was still affecting the village. For a minimum of 2 more years, the position of Hokage would not have a 4th member. Oh, Yandaime. Even the old man had to concede that he was certainly capable of taking on this mountainous responsibility, but it felt awkward to even consider that brat growing up to be old enough to do so. And up until this incident, his reputation in the village had been precisely that. He made a mistake the day he was tasked with training 3 children, hurting both them and himself. Even though it was referred to as a accident by the general public, Minato's reputation was already damaged. If he even wanted to run for the position, he was going to have a difficult time going forward. Whoever was the mastermind had meticulously planned it out. Thus, Hiruzen knew only 2 brains capable of devising such a cunning, damage-controlling scheme, and only one had direct knowledge of Minato's eventual succession. The other one? He's probably figured it out already. Additionally, either could have performed intricate, rule-breaking genjutsu, danzo, or orochimaru, through sheer ingenuity and inventiveness, with his Sharingan covered arm. Makoto's inability to analyze the genjutsu further tipped the odds in Orochimaru's favor. Finally, the question of motive arose. What motivation did either of them have to force Minato to murder all 4 of those children, Goku specifically? Danzo's philosophy was unimportant. Remove every danger to the village. Any suspicious individual must be dealt with discreetly and quickly. That much was clear. He hadn't gone out and spread rumors about the bloodstains close to the enclosure because he had made it clear that he thought the Uchiha posed a serious threat. Given the prevailing sentiment regarding the Uchiha's reclusive behavior, the people themselves had reached that conclusion. So, for the time being at least, he had accomplished his goal. Only Orochimaru remained. Now what was that evil student of his doing? In his case, only time would tell. Orochimaru was always able to conceal his intentions. Therefore, even though Hiruzen was aware of his schemes, he was unable to make any educated guesses without actually meeting the man. He was already mentally removing time from his schedule as he watched Kushina thoroughly chew out the 2 genins and the 3rd, unidentified piece. Discussing a security threat with Nara Shikaku. I just cannot afford to miss that. I might be able to put this off. The 4 continued to argue. Enough. Was all it took to get everyone's attention in the room. Very well, Kushina. I shall give you the missions. Now leave me alone for a while. Unlike you children, I actually have work to do, he added in an irritated tone. Kushina understood. The word, work, was subtly stressed, indicating that he was thinking of something more urgent than their current issues. She shut the door behind her and pushed all the children out. Hokage, in his 50s, sat down and rubbed his forehead. Unbidden, a migraine had suddenly struck. He let out an inward groan. This is getting to be too much for me. Makoto had grown a little impatient while waiting outside. She glanced at her best friend and said, I've nearly had enough of waiting. Any luck? What mission did you get, if at all? Did you manage to convince the old geezer? The sole reason for Kushina's dejected expression was prior experience. It was obvious that Haramaki-san's cat getting lost was a frequent occurrence. The 95-year-old woman's decision to keep the cat and her kittens indoors for extended periods of time was surprising. This was going to be a long day, the redhead sighed. The kids had no reason to be unhappy, so at least they appeared content. The most enthusiastic of them all appeared to be Goku, who proudly displayed his recently acquired forehead protector. That child gives too much fucks in life, man. The cat wasn't going to find itself, anyway. All right, she said as she moved to the sidewalk. She was surrounded by the other 4. This leadership thing felt good. She might be able to remove it from Minato's grasp for a while, or perhaps forever. She then had Goku's full attention, despite the fact that she knew he didn't need any motivation to jump around like a freaking monkey. So, we're going to split up from here. Goku and I will take the east side, and the 3 of you shall take the west. If someone does manage to catch hold of this annoying feline before lunchtime, I shall personally treat him or her to lunch. A monkey. The second thing that disturbed Kushina's tranquility that day was that the child had a tail. Even though that was fascinating, ever since she learned about Goku, she has been uneasy about him. Naturally, even the most unsightly humans did not typically exhibit this kind of outward display of animal traits. 3 eyes, possibly a balloon. Sized nose, possibly even blue skin, but, God forbid, a tail. There were only a few improbable reasons left for why he had a tail, and a hairy one at that. Of those, the most likely was that Goku might actually be. Oh, Kushina didn't want to consider this, but she had to acknowledge that it made too much sense. She did, however, feel a certain bond with the 13-year-old because she is a Jinchuriki. If the beast was docile, it was possible that it was inserted when he was very young and that it was sufficiently hidden for him to be unaware of its existence. It required a significant leap of faith to think that a beast would be submissive in such a situation. No matter how peaceful it was when free, any sentient creature would object to being trapped inside a human host. At least she was familiar with it. For the first few weeks, that ungrateful little fox would not stop thrashing. He continued to give her a little resistance once every 2 weeks. It was a strong desire to go and proudly stand on a cliff and howl at the moon in a dejected manner. For instance, it had occasionally become intolerable during the harvest moon, to the point where she would whimper in little fits at night. All of this was an attempt to allow the monster to calm down. Uzumaki Mito Sama, the former bearer of the legendary old fox, had already acknowledged how extremely challenging this task was and how crucial it was for the village that its power not end up in the wrong hands. She dismissed her nostalgia with a shake of her head. In addition to teaching these hyperactive kids a lesson, the infernal cat had to be located. They leapt away, gesturing to Goku. But Makoto and the other 2 went in the opposite direction. As they glided over the roofs at a slow pace, scanning the alleys from above for the 10-year-old tabby, Kushina couldn't help but stare at the child's butt. the simian limb protruding, moving on its own initiative. Goku, are you a Jinchuriki? And do you know if you are? Lastly, would you want to if you don't? Banzai? Fur had been found by Hitaki Kakashi, and the poor cat it was covering. Willing it to remain motionless, he gazed at it. Rin remained motionless behind him, holding her breath. Makoto was completely uninterested and stood by. I'll show you if you catch him the first time. She claimed that the gray-haired teen's winking for something more was enough motivation for the closet pervert. However, Makoto was certain that her special something was secure. She had witnessed what this cat was capable of because she had been on the same Genin's team as Kushina. It dodged, writhed, and fled until the three fools who were pursuing it were battered, bruised, and generally wondering what choices they had made in life that had led them to this point. Kakashi took a step forward to see what would happen. The cat remained motionless, staring directly into his eyes. He grinned. This would be so simple. They might be well on their way to a more successful mission with just one leap. He leapt, timing his leap. Until the very end, the cat gazed into his eyes. Then it darted beneath his soaring body with a savage twitch of its whiskers. Like a psychopath, he thrashed his arms in vain. Gravity really was a mean bitch. Particularly for the 13-year-old who is still recuperating. Crack. He bit his upper lip and squinted his eyes shut, trying to keep his sore muscles from complaining. Looking over his shoulder, he noticed the cat sitting directly behind him. It was licking a paw casually, but in an odd manner. It moved the paw back and forth rather than over it with its tongue. It had the effect of a challenger saying, "Come on." At that, Kakashi almost lost his temper. "Oh, you foolish cat, just wait. By the end of the day, you will be my bitch." The cat then stuck out one claw as though it had heard that exact thought. Anybody but that one could have done it. The prodigy with the gray hair was unsure of how to respond. He had just freaked out because of an animal. He jumped again, this time in exasperation, and scrambled to his feet. It moved just enough to allow his clawing, desperate fingers to get through its orange coat, sidestepping with a natural grace. Kakashi's eyes followed the subtle movements of its muscles as his head turned to follow its motion. I took note of the jerks it made before veering off course and committed them to memory. It wouldn't be able to get away the next time. He got back to his feet almost instantly, ignoring the protests of his battered body. He stared scornfully at his target, daring it to move. "Feel free, bitch." The feline did not act. Gave a satisfied purr and sat down to lick itself again, obviously not caring that the teen was making such a valiant effort to give it back to its owner. Kakashi's mouth almost began to foam. His chest spiral scar had started to throb once more. It had only been 3 freaking days, after all. With a look of pure murder in his eyes, he prepared himself for one last, calculated lunge at the cat. He saw the distinctive twitch that indicated a left dodge as he strained his haunches and leapt. Kakashi smiled and made a tiny, in-air positional change, and came to the realization that he had been mistaken for a jackass. The gray-haired teen's fingers were outstretched, but the cat's form sailed to the right and avoided them sadistically. After all, the twitches were arbitrary. As he prepared for a devastating blow, he watched it deftly avoid Rin's attempt to grab it and run off into the maze of streets beyond. West of their location was the Warren. Just around the corner, he caught what seemed to be the shadow of a laughing woman as he lay there, his body trembling from the unexpected surge of nerve impulses. For no other reason than that he was in too much pain to actually shake an imaginary fist at her. "You are the most vile of them all, Makoto, sensei." Goku was the only one who was relieved to be out of the hospital. He clambered up walls, jumped and bounded across rooftops, and ran until Kushina, with a menacing gleam in her eye, finally grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. "Runt, would you mind doing that again? I challenge you?" Goku swallowed. He had only wished to assess the advantages of his recent recuperation, but he was taken aback by how much he had developed despite such minor injuries. There was a cat to catch, and the moment was not right for experimentation. He shook off the Red Devil's hold and started looking. He hit Gold 1 alleyway in. It was there, a perfect duplicate of the image they had been shown for comparison. He prepared himself and charged, intent on defeating the cat. "Stop, you retard!" Kushina's warning echoed through the small room. He didn't listen to her. He was no longer influenced by the insults of the Red Devil. His face split into a smile as he dove blindly. The self-assured grin was returned by the cat. It avoided Goku's move with no effort at all, not even bothering to move this time. Because the Saiyan had made a terrible calculation error. He nearly broke his nose when he crashed into the stone wall after flying over the arrogant tabby's head. He got up and rubbed his face angrily, trying to stop the pain. His freshly washed GI was ruined with blood as a result of that exercise. It didn't matter because Minato had gotten 3 extra ones made for him in the same color and material. What was important was Kushina's irritated look as she made a concerted effort to contain her laughter at his faceplant. The cat, meanwhile, was just stretching idly a few feet away. That somehow made the Saiyan even more enraged. In case his next attempt failed, he pulled out his tail, ready to catch it with another appendage. He moved with a deceptive slowness, trying to lull Kushina into a sense of security, ignoring its startled expression. He had caught slipperier fish without even trying, so it shouldn't be this difficult. He suddenly started running in the direction of the cat. It didn't even bother to look at me. It didn't care about anything Goku did. It just looked arrogantly into the side alley. It stood languidly and retreated a step as he got closer. Its face seemed to say, almost aloud, "Come get me." Goku got close enough to give it a lunge, and he did it brilliantly. His torso was hunched with his hands extended, and his entire body arched, rising smoothly from the running motion into the air. If Kushina had been a swim instructor, she would have likely been in awe of the dive's technique. However, Goku was shit out of luck because Kushina was a Jonin. He saw a movement to the right as he got closer to the carefree cat's body, fingers frantically trying to grab its fluffy tail and hang on. Crack. Oh, it was always a lovely sound when 2 noggins struck each other. Kushina gazed at Goku and Kakashi, who couldn't contain their hunger any longer and fell to the ground with their mouths already buried in the ground. Makoto's lovely soprano giggles echoed her enormous guffaws from the perpendicular alleyway. At this rate, these idiots will require more than a day. Rin approached the now lazing again cat as she considered how they would further humiliate themselves. She did nothing but stand there for a whole minute. The cat just licked its paws, waiting for the girl to take action. She reached into her belt pouch and pulled out a cat treat. With her best ever smile, she offered it on her outstretched palm. In fact, she had witnessed Kurenai Chan using the power of the smile to attract men and the odd male animal. Rin's petty side came out with a bang. Oh, she's just pretty in the right light. The cat, meanwhile, appeared enthralled. It approached the treat, eyes fixed on the brown-haired girl's face, much to the complete confusion of everyone watching with wide, unblinking eyes. It went ape shit crazy when it got to the small brown object in her hand. With its claws fully extended, it slashed at Rin's hand, severing the entire thing after first snatching the food from its mouth. It leapt directly at her face, sending her to the ground as she flinched in agony. It hopped off and walked away with no worries at all after playing around joyfully with its claws a-whirl and leaving a crisscross of red lines across her ostensibly attractive face. As the irate, humiliated kids gave the cat 3 very shady looks, Kushina and Makoto's laughter reverberated through the tiny backstreet. "You have no right to harm Rin Chan. After I was so nice to you, how dare you treat me that way?" "Well, I suppose cat tastes the same whether it's fried or smoked." With a snick, the blade retracted. Blood poured from the sliced tissue underneath like a seeping spigot. The snake's translucent, milky skin shone with pleasure and laughter, giving his face an ethereal glow. The powerful joy of human experimentation was a pleasure unlike any other. "Why do you do it? Why must you give up these many people's lives?" The great shinobi was frequently asked that question. He was never able to respond to these foolish idiots. Even his most trivial motivations were beyond their comprehension. It never occurred to them that everything had an opposite, that every yin has a yang, so to speak. Ironically, the shadow of the fire was the shining beacon that their worthless minds clung desperately to, refusing to believe in the possibility of evil. The general public, who viewed what they could not comprehend as mythical and/or treacherous, never seemed to accept his place in society. He was a counterbalance of immense power and potential, the complete opposite of everything the Hokage stood for. In the same way that his sensei sought his soul in the joy and hearts of those around him, working to keep them all safe, he also made the decision to discover the real meaning of life and wisdom by learning the most powerful and effective ninjutsu ever developed. He was the pinnacle of human development. Compared to the other cowardly, flinching researchers of his era and earlier, he had gone farther and more daringly. In his own way, he had quietly led the village in a more respectable direction, one that, in Orochimaru's view, did not culminate in the gradual deterioration, rot, and ultimate destruction of this useless piece of land and humanity. He had examined one of his best examples, which came from the opposite side of the psychological fence, for that. Because of his exceptional talent, Senju Hashirama was the only other person Orochimaru gave a wit's worth to. His special methods, the capacity to virtually instantly regenerate any part of the body at the expense of a short lifespan in the future, and the necessity of Mokuton no Jutsu to control the Kyuubi were not to be taken lightly. He had realized there was an easy fix. He would bring back the use of the two greatest abilities that the shinobi land had never seen before, using the now deceased Shodai's remains and the vast amount of genetic information they contained. It was truly miraculous that the Shodai's cells could be recovered from the rubble that served as his tomb. To top it all off, he had accomplished the unthinkable by carefully examining the DNA of some of his test subjects, who were then 80 years old, and then putting it into their living ones. The regenerative powers that had survived and died with the first had finally been recreated by him after over a century. And now, just when he was about to make another breakthrough, the man who had taught him to dream, to look past what was visible, into the hazy darkness and see what was there, had rudely interrupted him. The sensei who had emphasized the value of curiosity and a voracious appetite for knowledge was now standing in his way. The student and the teacher faced off. There was a lot of subtext in the air. From the movements of their eyes and eyebrows, a dozen silent exchanges took place between the two. Slowly, as though submerged, the Sandaime raised his arm and took hold of the sacred pole he had strapped to his back. As Hiruzen readied himself, Enma appeared eager to depart, the adamantine staff spinning in the air. Orochimaru just grinned. Punishment was necessary for such brazen foolishness. Despite his advanced age, the Hokage was undoubtedly in decline. His once vast chakra reserves were gradually depleting over time, and the only ways he was able to maintain his advantage were by honing his chakra control and perfecting his ninjutsu so that each technique used the least amount of chakra possible. But given his current circumstances, Orochimaru considered all the variables and evaluated his chances of winning. It was uncertain what might occur if Hiruzen attempted to strike first given his current posture and ferocity. He simply chose to wait and pay attention to the geezer. But first, he needed to attend to another matter. "You can come out, you cowardly fools," he said, gesturing to the area behind the Sandaime itself. 4 Anbu members reluctantly stepped out of the shadows. The Anbu are such redundant, useless creatures. The reputation of our village is tarnished by their very presence. The course of the next few minutes will determine whether a good name remains to be tarnished. Orochimaru broke the silence by asking, "What brings the Hokage Sama to my humble abode? I wonder?" Despite being the underdog in this situation, he had a chance to win by using his sensei's emotion. He had, after all, spent less time chatting around than the other 2 idiots among the Sannin. Jiraiya had been studying their Jonin supervisor in great detail while he engaged in pointless pranks. From the beginning, Hiruzen used first names. "I think the topic of this discussion is very apparent, Orochimaru," she said. "A classic attempt to make the enemy more like you. Get to know each other well. It creates a feeling of comfort. The oldest trick in the book, literally." Orochimaru concluded that names were irrelevant after weighing the likelihood that this was an obvious bluff, the less obvious double bluff, or the subtle triple bluff. Instead, it worked in his favor. His good or sensei didn't matter to him at all. But he could see the worry and disappointment in Hiruzen's. But there was no way he could save his skin that way. Never did Orochimaru grovel. Never groveled, but bargained, demanded, and negotiated. He also struggled with using the third person to describe himself, but I'm getting off topic. "But of course, Sarutobi Sensei," he said, purposefully emphasizing the honorific. He noticed that Hiruzen had somewhat calmed down. "I think we both know how this conversation is going to proceed, too. So I shall skip the unnecessary waste of time." Orochimaru pondered, so he had expected a physical confrontation. The Hokage was attempting to regain power when he said, "Debate shall get us nowhere. I shall tell you what I want, and will generously give you one chance at a counter-offer. Are you now hiding behind your chair? Horrible?" He concluded that open rebellion was not necessary at this time. Because of the stage in which his experiment was conducted, it would be impossible to move all of his equipment. It was crucial that he extract the child's genes while it was still very young. His DNA broke down more quickly than that of most human samples, for some reason. It disintegrated within hours of the cell dying, as if a self-destruct command had been inserted into the code. He and his equipment had to stay near the boy, as it was not practical to actually capture him for testing for the foreseeable future. His traits are so different from those of the typical person. He is the perfect test subject for me because he is so far from the bell curve mean that he could probably be classified as a different species. And it hit him like a flash of lightning. When had he ever given a damn about Hiruzen lecturing him again? He thought about the implications of this notion while feigning concentration with eye movements and the occasional head movement. Everything would be explained if little Goku-kun belonged to a different species. The disorientation, the tail, and, above all, the regeneration. He had no choice but to remain here now. There was now another driving force behind his experiment. He waited for the old fool to finish his self-righteous sermon with increasing annoyance. If it would get Hiruzen out of here right away, he was willing to sacrifice some of his other experimental procedures in order to stay in Konohagakure. The clean samples he had taken were deteriorating as he continued to rant. Once more, he was finding that his teacher's very presence was a barrier. Geezer, I wish you would just give up. Orochimaru interrupted the Sandaime mid-sentence, raising his voice and asking, weren't we not going to debate? His tone conveyed a sense of finality that went beyond simple words. I have an offer. I shall stop pursuing the yellow-haired fledgling you want to name your heir. That matters not to me, in any case. Hiruzen picked up on it. Now that his goal had been accomplished, there was no more reason to stay. Hiruzen had to have the last word. I wish you would change, but that is mere whimsy, she said. One more small flaw in his personality. The Sandaime turned and walked away, putting the ancient staff back in its sheath and saying, farewell for now, my student. Orochimaru hurried to the cold storage before the door had even closed behind him. Now, every minute matters. DNA that was at a later stage of degradation than that required for the extraction of individual segments could be used for species analysis. His prior sample would have been adequate, but it was getting close to the point at which it was no longer useful. Orochimaru removed the petri dish and placed it on the work table. He halted additional cell division by adding the arresting solution. He started the reactions that would provide him with the purest form of DNA using a different set of chemicals. These typically took time, but Orochimaru started using chakra to catalyze the reaction. This was a very dangerous technique unless done carefully, but it produced results almost instantly. It was finished a few seconds later. He started the device right away after carrying the sample to the analyzer. He was very nearly there. It was a race against time, a race against the fast deterioration. Once this theory was established, he could move on to more presumptions that he was mistaken. As he made a list of potential options, it was almost possible to see the genius's brain in motion. In general, interspecies gene transplants never worked out, but in this instance, he had been extremely fortunate to avoid a negative reaction in his earlier attempts. Now it was time to follow the proper procedure. His eyes were full of unrestrained passion. Here he was, pushing the boundaries of his own understanding, perhaps even uncovering a new humanoid species that was so structurally and morphologically like the typical humans in its immediate vicinity that it just blended in. This mutation, which typically takes millions of years to occur, may be nearly impossible. He eagerly awaited the completion of the reaction. Though it might not be enough, the chakra catalysis had bought some time. A single random deterioration could make the sample worthless. Ironically, something that was essentially the regeneration instruction manual was told to be reduced to nothing so quickly. Nature itself seemed to be guarding its secrets, unwilling to cede them to the one race that could utilize and comprehend them. No more than one, but perhaps two, he thought. He had not experienced such euphoria in a long time, but it was beginning to build. The whirring of the machine stopped, it was finished. The answer was neatly written as a machine-drawn graph on the paper, so Orochimaru didn't have to check. The amount of time required was sufficient evidence. He was unable to control himself. He threw back his head and laughed heartily. You are very interesting, Goku-kun. Very interesting, in fact. The great hidden village of Konoha was not surrounded by a typical forest. It was believed to have enormous powers with mystical and ancient roots, giving a committed ninjutsu practitioner the advantages of both chakra and longevity. Well, it was said. The village at the time thought these prophecies were nonsense. The shinobi had achieved what they referred to as a more modernistic outlook on life and philosophy in general, despite their continued belief in the myth of the Kyuubi's abilities. Massive disagreements over what to believe resulted from this, and the villagers ultimately decided on one. Since there was no real villain to despise, they directed their hopes toward the Hokage and used all of their remaining resentment to mock and alienate the Uchiha. The underlying currents of discontent and conspiracy that threatened to overthrow the edifice of power were completely unknown to Goku. Anyway, he didn't give a flying fuck. There was nothing he could do about this village. He was here to train and take pleasure in what would probably be his final days on Earth. He had come to like the people he spent time with in spite of this indifference. Even Kakashi, with his icy gaze and caustic remarks, meant well. These were good, kind people. He wasn't complaining, but this was not a very new experience for him. After all, it was time to relax, both physical and mental. Gazing into the horizon and the upside down trees, he dangled from a branch. Although it appeared delicate, his tail casually supported his weight as it gripped the wood. After all, he was only 13 and a skeleton in comparison to his former adult body, so it wasn't that great. Gravity took the place of sheer ki as the uplifting element, and his spiky hair took on the shape it usually had when he was Super Saiyan. He hadn't had a day off in a month until today. The 3 genins under Uzumaki Kushina had been carrying the entire scroll of D-rank missions on their heads since the day they had taken their first mission. This particular group of restless teenagers had gone above and beyond to complete what seemed like an endless stream of assignments, while the other Genin 3-man cells trained and gallivanted away their 4-week vacation following the academy examination. Goku recalled how he literally went above and beyond on that first mission. Goku stood back to back with Rin, hiding and holding his breath as she made another attempt to entice the cat. She had invited the unwary cat in for another treat while maintaining a clear escape route between her legs. Goku had abruptly leaned over, pushing Rin ahead as it had taken the treat as expected and abruptly walked away. As a result, they both abruptly lost their balance, and the Saiyan was holding the cat's tail once the dust from the commotion had subsided. A total fluke, Kushina had said. The 3 were indifferent at the time, 50 failures later. They had just walked haughtily away, trying and failing to keep their dignity, ignoring their laughing supervisors. Fortunately for their own dignity, the other missions had proceeded smoothly and without any significant incidents. Certain missions, like searching a particular lake in the forest for indications of a man eating fish, were certainly intriguing, using the word in its broadest sense, but others, like excavating holes for lampposts, were obviously glorified forms of community service. Even though it was mind-numbingly dull, the digging had been a good workout until Kakashi discovered a method for shoveling earth that required a lot of opposing muscles, which meant more effort and, consequently, free strength training for his torso. Goku began pumping the excavating tool like a dumbbell after realizing his strange movements had a purpose. Speaking of training, Goku shuddered uncontrollably. Although he now had missions to finish, Kushina had not slowed down his demanding schedule. It seemed as though she wished to bring out the latent power within him in just 1 month and a half, if not 3 weeks. Progress was sluggish, even with Goku's enormous appetite and treatment comparable to that of a concentration camp. It was mostly because he was just starting to experience the effects of puberty. He couldn't get any stronger until this new body had recovered from the hormonal and physical turmoil. Even so, his body looked a lot like Gohan's from when he battled Cell. If nothing else, he'd reached that far. In recent days, Kushina had also abandoned the muscle gain program in favor of honing his skills. Goku's strength was at its peak. The time had come to practice his Atajutsu skills, use of chakras, and, above all, his proficiency with his black Anbu blade. The redhead had left different people in charge of different parts of his training. She took care of herself using standard shinobi equipment and engaging in simple hand-to hand combat. She had asked Kakashi to practice swordsmanship with Goku and leave chakra control to Makoto. She was hesitant to leave 2 fiercely competitive kids to this, but she was inexperienced with a katana, and Goku only needed Kakashi's close proximity and patronizing demeanor to get his act together. At first, Kakashi was far superior to Goku, but his work ethic, intense training schedule, and desire to avoid embarrassing himself in front of Makoto were starting to level the playing field. His attacks had become much more fluid, and his increased ability to control chakras allowed him to change the blade's weight as he moved, making it slightly heavier to put more strain on his muscles. His primary goal was to train his body to be as swift as Kakashi's while wielding a heavier sword. He is completely mistaken. The only reason for the minuscule weight difference was to allow his haired opponent to rape his ass. Kakashi sheathed his sword casually, even whistling for effect, and he had lost count of how many times he had eaten dirt at his feet. At times, defeat had come so swiftly and unexpectedly that the stony-faced Kushina had even given it pathetic looks. Experience, along with the innate reflexes that accompanied it as a byproduct, was what separated them. Furthermore, Goku's plans for a surprise victory were still in the future because one could only gain so much experience in a week. He was happy to wait for that eventual catching up for the time being. He was eager for his recovery. Kakashi, just wait. I'll beat that arrogant face of yours until you have to use a straw to drink every meal. He had also learned from his brief escape from Shenron's grasp that his ki, which he had thoughtlessly offered to the great dragon in return for the release of his soul, had started to regenerate. Even though it was still tiny, just a drop in comparison to the ocean he had previously had, it continued to grow. He was fairly accurate in his prediction that he would return to a reasonable level in 10.5 years. Shenron. Now he recalled all those things that had happened with little to no impact. As far as he was concerned, the psychological damage from that incident would never go away, but at least he could go back in time to the event without having the urge to curl up into a ball and cry uncontrollably. Although it still occasionally made him shudder, it had all but vanished from his subconscious. Over the past few days, some other memories of the dragon had started to surface, emerging momentarily from the haze in his mind before re-emerging. He distinctly recalled some of the things that had happened to him, such as the feeling of awe at first and the joy he had experienced when he first merged with the Dragon Balls and became one with Shenron. Additionally, he thought that one particular phrase emerged from the muck much more frequently than the others. Sometimes it was a whisper that kept repeating. Even though it was no longer as noticeable, he occasionally heard the Eternal Dragon's baritone speak in the middle of the night. You will discover the actual meaning of death in this new life of yours. You won't realize how terrible what you have unleashed is until you are trapped within the boundaries of the real dystopia. You are about to enter a new world, so don't worry about the repercussions. Because one day this dystopia will be released. One day. One day. He frequently pondered the meaning of the premonition. And what was a dystopia? What repercussions would I have to deal with? Encumber. As well. Is it a word at all? What on earth does it mean? His head always ached from all this needless thinking. He abandoned that line of thought and looked around at the forest. Below him, an extremely visible animal snare was waiting for the target animal to become entangled in it. He had been waiting for 5 hours in a row. His stomach rumbled massively as if in reaction. He was starting to feel hungry. After all, he might need to get a little messy. After his 5th mission, the Hokage had very unjustly stopped giving him food money. After all, he was a warrior on a salary, one who was hired to carry his own burden. He was receiving funding to help those who were too weak to help themselves. So far, half of the money he had received had vanished in a single meal. Given Goku's substantial contribution to the expansion of his business, Ichiraku was shocked to learn of this unexpected funding loss and graciously consented to accept a smaller sum. However, Goku needed to figure out how to feed himself because even the owner of the ramen shop was growing impatient. He had never gone game hunting before. Goku-kun, give me the ingredients, and I'll prepare all the food you desire. Goku had enthusiastically accepted the deal that Ichiraku had offered him. How difficult could catching a few goats and chickens be? The easiest, he thought, would be cows. He had easily obtained a few with his bare hands and had used them for a few meals, but he didn't have the time to waste every day on things like catching his own food. He had to get used to hunting without being there. All he had to do was set a trap, and it seemed easy. Oh, it was really difficult. The challenge of his current task was far more difficult than catching Haramaki. Sans irrational cat. When he had asked her for hunting tips, Kushina had laughed aloud. She had just kept laughing until the red-faced teenager slunk away, too embarrassed to deal with the looks he and his hellish sensei were receiving from onlookers. He had learned all the theoretical information he could from reading books. Getting a rabbit or other small animal to accept the bait and putting the damn snare together were now the primary tasks. This was much more difficult than he had anticipated. He'd set the trap after a string of self-inflicted cuts, string burns, and a very eloquent series of adult expletives that would have choked anyone listening. He had been waiting all day. Nothing. He then realized that no rabbit would be foolish enough to go into his apartment, let alone the village. Cue author sarcasm. Cue laughter track. After a lot of effort and hunger, his supply of cup ramen had run out. He had finally succeeded in capturing one of the white, furry animals. He had brought his catch to Ichiraku with pride. The businessman had not been impressed. He told Goku to be more aggressive if he wanted more food, and he'd forked over a single bowl of plain beef noodles. At that point, Goku had all but given up on life. He had considered eating moderately to cut down on his expenditures with the kind of wisdom that only comes from extreme hunger, but the idea of rationing his food made him feel deeply uncomfortable. He needed to eat, and he needed to find a way to pay for it. However, he was aware that wage negotiations were not his strong suit. He may end up making less money than he did before that specific conversation with His Eminence. Goku swallowed. All he could do now was for her. He needed to consult Uchiha Makoto. He could still clearly recall that day and how embarrassed he had been to whisper his weaknesses in her ear. He recalled his bewildered expression when she asked him, "Isn't there a mess near your apartment? 600 ryo a month for all you can eat." He stopped attempting to win Kushina over on that day. She was the embodiment of hell. She had just watched him laugh inwardly as he burned through his pockets to eat nothing but scraps. Until the day I die, I believe she will keep playing tricks on me. Already tormenting a voodoo doll of the redhead in his mind, he turned away. He turned to see the Uchiha making an ineffective attempt to control herself after hearing Makoto's giggles in the background. She had been involved from the start and had apologized, saying, "Sorry, son-kun. We were just trying to see how long it took you to figure it out." Oh, how diabolical Kushina was, really diabolical. Even though he was aware of his helplessness in the face of her schemes, Goku had made the decision to never again fall for this type of mind game. A sudden movement beneath him brought the Saiyan back to the present. He opened one eyelid and looked down without a sound. At last, a rabbit had made the decision to appear on Goku. It appeared so exposed, sniffing at the bait inside the snare just like that. Just a little bit closer, please. He was able to meet his food needs, but he kept up his hunting training. When they eventually received an outfield mission, it would be extremely helpful. The Hokage had stated that they would receive their first C rank assignment following this brief weekend break, and the D rank scroll was now nearly empty. For the exhausted trio, it would be a well-earned reward. They were the first team in the village's history to intentionally overwork themselves. After 5 minutes of watching its activities, Goku became too disinterested to wait. He pulled out his black blade very quietly. He took varied, cautious aim, willing chakra into it. He just let the sword drop and watched it fall. He forced his eyes to stay open even though his mind flinched. The blade fell on the unwary rabbit, glinting in the slanted mid-morning sunlight. The heavy sword cut straight through the poor rabbit's vertebrae, entering just to the right of them. Because of the sword's immense size, tissue resistance issues weren't an issue. It drove itself into the ground and exited close to the chest. The rabbit was pinned to the ground without touching it because Goku had controlled the weight so that it slowed down enough as it passed through. While teaching him the same technique with a stone weighted kunai, Kushina had referred to it as a clean kill. He was too bored to locate a sufficiently heavy stone this time, but he had become fairly proficient in both the black blade and the kunai method. He shook his head slightly, even though he had made an effort to become indifferent to the situation. This was the part of hunting he never enjoyed. It was okay to catch the damn thing, but it was still painful to watch them skewer it with a sharp object. He had allowed Chi to care for every animal he had captured. He was aware of the irony of that circumstance, but his mind had not yet come to terms with the coldness of killing in this manner. Knowing that there would be assassinations, espionage, and full-scale combat in this world of shinobi, Goku had to accept the fact that he would have no choice but to attack, driving his blade between his opponent's ribs and into his heart in a kill.or.be killed situation. Goku still had a few nicks on his chest from the move that Kakashi had taught him, where the gray-haired prodigy had lightly touched him to indicate that a kill strike was possible and that he was dead in that specific round. Goku let go of the branch, fell to the ground, and carefully picked up the sword to avoid displacing the rabbit. From the wound in its chest, a thin stream of blood had rolled down the black blade. Goku missed by 1/4 of an inch, which disappointed him. He heard footsteps ahead of him as he drew the lifeless creature from his sword. Clear, unmasked footsteps. He did not even raise his head. He set the rabbit aside and began excavating a fire pit. Kushina had said that he also needed to learn how to cook his own meat. A few yards ahead of him, he heard the footsteps halt. His visitor had yanked him roughly to his feet by his hair, but he stayed focused on his work and would have continued to do so. He was furiously going to punch Kakashi in the face for this folly. He was about to hurl a haymaker to his genitalia when he drew back his fist and was startled by a female voice. "I'm pretty sure you wouldn't want to do that." He looked up in surprise at the woman who had so rudely accosted him. After the ordeal with the assassins, the woman was the one who had healed him. She had very light blonde hair that was almost white. He didn't know why she was here. He backed up a few quick steps and moved away from her. "What are you doing here?" he asked, keeping a wary, cautious eye on her. She crossed her arms under her chest and remarked, "No hellos, I see." Such an impolite child. For a good 5 seconds, Goku's hormone-addled brain was unable to see anything else, despite his best efforts to avoid looking. He managed to bring his gaze back to her face and ask, "What do you want?" Her eyes never strayed. "You seem like an interesting kid, I hear," she said. Goku was starting to get a little uneasy. Reluctantly, Goku said, "Really? What have you heard?" "Oh, things," she uttered while maintaining eye contact with him. "You were a kid, right?" That one almost threw him off balance. He stammered, Oh, of circa C. Course, W. What do you mean?" What was this woman aware of him? Suddenly, a smile appeared on the stern face. "Just kidding," she said with a laugh. Goku smiled nervously, not feeling particularly relieved. Another second. His thoughts nudged him. Insidiously, he attempted to catch another glimpse of the woman's ample. The motherly words, "Are you staring at me, you little perv kid?" sounded uncannily like Kushina's false composure prior to her eventual hurricane. No, Goku's red face revealed his deception. Now there was no turning back. He had no good reason to hide the fact that she had seen him peek. When the Saiyan said, "I'll let it slide, this once, all right," his mouth fell open. He was expecting this aggressive woman to beat the living daylights out of him, and now this? There is a serious problem with this whole situation. This is a really frightening situation. Anyway, Forget about that, the woman said, seemingly preparing to begin her main point. Wait, ma'am, Goku said, interrupting with the most respectful term he knew. Could you tell me your name? I'm Goku, by the way. She had paused a bit before responding. Ah, right, she obviously wasn't accustomed to being unknown. Goku didn't even respond to that one. The name's Tsunade. Glad to see you aren't named as stupidly as you look, he said. He had been mistreated by Kushina many times. Like most of the people he knew in those days, insults were a means of bonding for women like them. I believe Vegeta would have been intrigued by this woman. Tsunade was obviously not one to mince words, saying, anyway, I haven't come here for small talk. There is something which you can do, as part of your team, which no other person, or even team, can achieve. Goku didn't know what she was discussing. You mean the team of Genins I belong to? She gave a nod. Yes, Goku was aware. As you already know, I specialize in medical ninjutsu. She created beautiful healing chakra weaves. It was amazing how quickly and expertly she had replaced his blood and closed all of his wounds. Thanks for that, by the way, Goku said, realizing he had not thanked the stranger for helping him. She waved her hand dismissively, brushing aside his gratitude. Never you mind about that. I actually came here to ask you whether you were interested in learning how to be a medical shinobi. Goku was somewhat surprised. Then he asked Tsunade, why me specifically? Learning such delicate chakra control techniques didn't bother him in the slightest. They could be used anywhere, perhaps to enhance his Kamehameha or Sengon or whatever he created by combining two of those items. You are one of the few people, barring the now dead Uzumaki clan, who seems to have the massive chakra necessary to pull off some of my more advanced techniques, she responded. I have managed to develop patterns far more complex and powerful than what I used on you the other day. Goku was really impressed. There was something more sophisticated than the healing he had witnessed, which was practically a miracle in and of itself. He wanted to become a doctor and just agree with everything Tsunade said. Goku swallowed at the last sentence. Also, your team seems to be the only exception to the 3-man cell rule set by that retarded old Shodai G.G. During a training session that doubled as a trivia session, Kushina had taught the Saiyan the concept of ranks. He belonged to the Genin race, which was followed by the Chunins and then the Jonins. Because Minato was a Jonin and she and Makoto were Chunin, he was tasked with leading a team. In any case, her tirade against the Shodai sounded a bit too severe to be coming from the mouth of a random shinobi. She must have been a Jonin at the very least, and a powerful one at that. G.G seemed too intimate for anything but family, for some reason. What did he know, though? Even now, he has never been able to address him as anything other than his, followed by arbitrary honorifics. I have talked to Sarutobi Sensei, and he has given me permission to do as I please. Wait and wait. Sensei. Sarutobi? How many contacts does this woman actually have? When Goku needed to get things done, he now knew who to turn to. Tsunade appeared to know everyone in the village somehow. The question was bold and direct. So, what do you say, kid? Want to become my apprentice? She spoke without holding back, and Goku appreciated that. No needless praise, just a straightforward acknowledgement. He would undoubtedly die from exhaustion if he had to cram this into his already full schedule. What would I have to do? Don't I have to do missions and my other training with Kushina? Oh, it won't come to that, I think, Tsunade said. After you take the Chunin examination and pass, you will be allowed to take up whatever subjects you want to study, a specialization, of sorts. Think of this as a future offer. I will take a few of your weekends in the future, and as you progress to a Chunin, I will then properly train you, and you can choose to do nothing else. Missions, though, you will have to manage along with all this. At this, Goku whooped and winced. His motivation and driving force had been strengthened once more. He needed to defeat Kakashi and turn into a Chunin as quickly as possible. If it was possible, the next few months of his life had become even more interesting. He giggled enthusiastically and was shocked when he only made a squeak. He was completely bewildered for a moment before realizing what had transpired. As well, Tsunade had smiled. Goku was starting to break his voice. Thank you so much, Shen. Retard.Ron. I now have to go through this strange stage once more. That's on top of the feelings I already have for Makoto and I'm starting to develop. Oh no. He had forgotten all about it. She had accepted his invitation to lunch. Observing the sun, it felt as though the moment was drawing near. And here he was, covered in rabbit blood and sweating profusely, discussing training with a stranger. We shall commence with this tomorrow, then? We also have to consider your rather special status in the village, of course. Goku rushed off, leaving a furious Tsunade in the forest. I'm really sorry, but could we do this another time? I'm really late for something, Goku said. Tsunade laughed softly despite her irritation with the present generation. Goku was really something else. She had never before, and Kami forbid she ever will, viewed anyone through the eyes of a devoted sensei, but Goku reminded her somewhat of Nawaki's eccentricity and recklessness. You continue with your important thing, but remember that you will spend tomorrow in hell until you apologize. I made a hell. Goku ran all the way to his small rented apartment and jumped through the window. There would be a huge commotion if Kotonoha.san discovered that he was dragging all of the dirt and dust from the streets onto the tatami mat. But he didn't mind. He looked at the wall clock and saw that he had a few minutes left. He hurriedly undressed and jumped into the shower, kicking open the faucet. He considered Tsunade's offer as the warm water ran over his body. Certainly, it seems like something I would never pursue either. But isn't that the point? He cleaned himself by steaming chakra close to his skin, which removed the water particles from all of his surfaces. He collapsed them into a single ball, amazed at how muddy and brown it looked. He hadn't washed all the way through, it appeared. Wearing his final clean GI, he leapt out of the window once more, landing heavily on the wall face next to it. He ascended, figuring out a straight line to Ichiraku's. When it came to traversal, he was the fastest of his genins. No one could match him. It was evidence of the physical prowess that the Saiyan had developed over many generations of conflict and battle. Rising impossible from the last structure in his path, he flew through the midday sun and landed hard. He would be in front of the ramen restaurant with one final turn. One of many Ichirakus now. The owner had made some excellent investments after becoming extremely wealthy from those first meal payments. He lifted and folded his hands in an apologetic gesture as he skidded and grinded to a stop in front of a Makoto who was waiting. The Uchiha Chunin remarked, "I see you've bathed and come today. That's a major improvement, I must admit. For just that, do you seriously think I'll forgive you being a whole hour late?" Goku was perplexed. There was still time, according to the time he checked at home. To Makoto, who was obviously furious, he reiterated that. Her expression remained exactly the same. "Did I not tell you to wind that stupid clock yesterday? It only lasts a week, and I was the one who wound it the last time as well." Oh no, the Saiyan hung his head in shame. He felt a little depressed because he had lost an hour of time with Makoto. As that thought suddenly occurred to him, he questioned its origin. He recalled guiltily how much he had loved she, but how training always came before time with her. However, this was different. He wanted to drop everything and run to Makoto's side to spend all of his waking hours with her, in her company, for some reason. "I'm really sorry, Makoto," he said, expressing his sincere regret. "I really wanted to come on time, but..." Her charming smile was back. "You don't have to waste your time on apologies, son.kun," she said. Standing in the gentle breeze, her dress's skirt fluttering slowly, she was a sight to behold in the afternoon light. It was the natural light moment that all artists longed for. Goku's gaze was almost too intense to control. His heart started to beat a little faster, and he flushed. Please consult the closest shoujo manga for more romantic bullshit. Thank you, and that's all. Anyway, lunch? Makoto asked as if she was ready to move past her tardiness. 5 inches shorter than Makoto, he stepped up beside her and thanked his lucky stars. Makoto, who was 5'7", wasn't particularly tall, but she was able to compete with the taller 5'8" Tsunade and the slightly shorter 5'6" Kushina. Rin, the only other girl in the village he knew, was only about 4 years old. She still had a couple of inches to grow because she was only 13. Goku had yet to experience his growth spurt. He had started to deepen his voice a bit, but then he would have the spurt that would put him over 6 feet, if not more, based on his calculations. Holding his head 2 inches above the 5'11" Minato would be fantastic, I agree. At the moment, Kakashi was his height, and he anticipated that they would be equally tall. Obito would most likely be the least popular member of the group. Goku's height was projected to be at least 5'9", if not lower. However, that was irrelevant. He must have benefited from all the patching up he had received. Perhaps he became taller as a result. Although Uchiha and Minato were still in the hospital, they were soon to be released. After completing his psychological evaluation, the doctors deemed him fit to return to his responsibilities as a genin team leader and a jonin. They approached the spacious, expansive establishment. Goku recalled the awful bowl of beef miso ramen he had had here the last time. He had come with a full stomach from breakfast because today was his senpai's treat. He didn't want to ruin her finances, so eating healthily was a different matter when it came to his money. He placed a modest order, selecting foods that would satisfy his hunger and be reasonably priced. Since Makoto wasn't a moron, she noticed right away. It was clear from the Saiyan's blush. "What are you doing, son.kun?" "Nothing," was Goku's flimsy attempt at a lie to save it. "I'm not very hungry." Brrump. He had once again been deceived by his empty stomach. Sheesh, son.kun, reprimanded Makoto. Why don't you act your own age for once? An awkward silence fell. Makoto brought his serious, inquisitive eyes to meet hers. Her eyes were filled with serious doubt as she asked, "You are 13, son.kun, correct?" Goku was unsure of how to react. Lying through his teeth, he said, "Yes, Makoto, I am." For the time being, she appeared reassured. Her eyes retained a hint of incredulity, as if she hadn't fully accepted him yet. Silence prevailed throughout the remainder of the lunch. Goku, in a very bad mood, trudged back to his quarters, trying to think of ways to avoid the conversation, but he couldn't think of any. Ignoring Kotonoha-san's protests, he slammed his apartment's main door behind him. He stomped upstairs and collapsed like a dead fish on his bed. He buried his face in a pillow to muffle the sound as he yelled out while holding his face in his hands. "Why do you have to do this to me, Kami?" This was going to lead to an afternoon of self-loathing. He was aware that it would happen. A rap on the window interrupted him as he was getting ready to eat his usual cup of leftover ramen while he sulked in his misery. Goku didn't initially look. It was most likely a member of another genin team doing their final training sessions, or someone stepping off his window pane. The pane then shattered completely, sending glass shards flying in all directions. With a frown on his brows, Hitaki Kakashi lowered his heel. "You weren't answering the doorbell, so I tried the window. When you didn't give a fuck then as well, I actually had to try it," he said in lieu of an apology. Today, Goku had experienced his fair share of sorrow. Laconically, "What do you want now?" he asked. "I want you to get that sad ass of yours off that bed, and come with me to the hospital. They're discharging Minato-sensei today." The boy with gray hair responded. "And that retard Obito as well," he added after the fact. At the news, Goku became more animated. He knew that his sensei's outburst and insane attacks weren't his fault because of Makoto's information. The blonde Jonin had been given some genjutsu, which is why he overreacted so violently. Unlike the other two members of his team, he was therefore thrilled to see Minato again. Kakashi appeared to have a few offensive words ready for this particular situation. He was certain that they would be as vibrant as he had envisioned. Despite her quiet demeanor, Rin was also quite upset about it. "Come on," beckoned Kakashi. "Let's go," playfully. Goku threw the ramen cup at him. Kakashi easily dodged it and jumped off the windowsill. Goku did the same, keeping up with his opponent the entire way to Konohagakure General Hospital. They were perfectly in sync with one another, leaping over impossibly long distances and climbing tall walls with their feet hardly touching the ground. Goku was deliberately holding back. He was obviously faster than the other one, but this was no time to compete. In order to improve his coordination with Kakashi and combine offensive and defensive sequences more effectively during enemy battles, it was a team effort. The simplest way to accomplish said teamwork was to keep a steady pace while remaining in sync with each other. But Kakashi had a different idea. He accelerated slightly and issued the Saiyan an open challenge. Goku obeyed, picking up his speed just enough to match his steps once more. This did not need to be hurried. Even the arrogant gray-haired prodigy was aware of his inferiority. There was not enough time or distance to begin a full sprint after the initial provocation. They jumped off a rooftop horizontally, flew through the air first, and then landed in front of a waiting Nohara Rin in front of the hospital entrance. She gave them both a nod in greeting, the gesture to Goku being as flimsy as the affection she conveyed to Kakashi. The trio went inside and made their way to the outpatient room. A bitter taste lingered in Goku's mouth as he recalled the location. He detested the excessively hygienic conditions, the disinfectant odor, and most of all, the ridiculous food they provided. Despite everything, he especially hated the shots the doctor had given him for vaccinations. 5 large, muscular nurses had been required to restrain him for the brief moment required for the doctor to insert the needle into his ass. During his struggle, Goku kicked the shortest of them in the chin, and he saw that one as he passed. His jaw was plastered over, and he wore a full chin brace. After giving him a sheepish smile, the Saiyan hurried away. When he arrived at the room, he discovered the two of them in their simple clothes, lying on beds. They were awaiting the signing of their final discharge documents, which would grant them freedom. The red-haired Kushina was standing beside Minato's bed, and Makoto was seated in the chair beside her. Goku had anticipated her presence. He looked away out of sheer awkwardness, and he caught a glimpse of her doing the same. He swallowed. He had not anticipated their relationship developing in that manner. Her first words were, "I'm sorry," the blonde Jonin said. Red in the face, Kushina said, "I really should have been more careful, and kept a check on my anger. I heard it was caused by a genjutsu." She obviously had a lot to say. As he waited for his girlfriend to relax, Minato lowered his voice. I'm not even going to rant again about how irresponsible that was. You already know, my retarded boyfriend, Kushina said, gesturing to Kakashi. Kakashi felt the spiral scar on his chest without realizing it. You have given these children some scars that will probably never be healed again, save by Tsunade's miracles, he said. Too ashamed to look at his students, Minato turned his head away. Kushina would never conclude a lecture with the words, anyway, ranting aside, but she had some important news to share. I have a few pieces of news for you guys. The Hokage Sama has informed me that Minato's team would be taking on an outfield C-rank mission, upon their Jonin Sensei's recovery. Now that Minato is fighting fit again, you shall accompany him to the Sandame's chambers, where it will be assigned to you. Minato was impressed and asked, You've finished the D-rank scroll in a month? Kushina also nodded, that place deserved respect. Also, this C-rank mission would be of a probationary nature, both for Minato's fitness as a Jonin Sensei, and the abilities of his team. Kushina went on, only if this mission is completed will you get designated as an official 4-man cell, the first one ever created. That would make you entitled to a variety of things, such as... Kakashi had regained his voice and said, screw that. Why don't we do missions simply as an unofficial team? I'm sure we won't have to go through the hassle of registering and all. Kushina was smiling dangerously once more. Minato automatically reached for Goku's gi's upper garment. We will not put up with such disrespect for the Red Devil. As if mirroring the hue of her hair, her eyes glowed like embers. Habanero, as the frightened kids in her neighborhood had appropriately named her. Goku was aware that he was going to see her in her utmost rage. In actuality, the response was rather lackluster. She took a deep breath and let it out loud. Her expression visibly calmed as she closed her eyes and appeared to count to 10. Her voice remained steady as she went on, if you had let me speak, you little runtlet, you would have realized that I was about to name your freaking incentive in all this. For this group, at least for 2 of you in this group, an important deadline is approaching. Kakashi nodded in comprehension after appearing stunned as he recalled. Goku didn't get jack shit, he just looked stunned. Exasperated, Kushina rolled her eyes. The Chunin exam application deadline, retard. She murmured. The actual examination is in a year, but applications and recommendations are supposed to be submitted by Jonins 11 months in advance, to allow the strained villages a chance to rally together for once, and create peaceful treaties for the respective applicants to arrive to Konoha by the stipulated date. Goku was still perplexed. He began, but was stopped by Minato's hand wave. Kushina continued to speak. So, you have to submit your letter of intent to Minato before 3 weeks from now, at the latest, and he has to give it in by a week after that. I didn't realize I would have to make a decision so quickly, the Saiyan thought. However, given our somewhat tense relationship, it will take some time to ask Makoto for her opinion. Now, Shenron, just kill me and be done with it. The Uzumaki added, but, to finish. Kakashi now appeared bored as well. You people have to be an official, registered team until then, and those papers take a week to get processed. Even if an exception were to be made with respect to the date of submission of the applications, you'd still have to be official by that time. So, this mission is your only chance. Do it badly, and you lose your chance of becoming a Chunin for the next year, maybe even 2. So, you have to report to the Hokage's chambers at 5:30, today evening. There, you will receive your briefing. I really don't know more about this one, so you'll have to find out for yourself. Minato, let's go. I still have to have a private word with you before you leave. Makoto understood the meaning of the word, private. She turned to look at Goku's happy, excited face just as she was about to pout in disgust. He and Kakashi were both very excited. After everything we've faced, an unknown C-rank mission, and an outfield one at that. And let's not forget what's riding on this. Determining to outperform one another in this single mission, they exchanged glances. Go ahead, baby. With the sun out, the whole Konoha village appeared bright and radiant. Right on the main street, Uchiha Obito walked with a bounce in his step. Because he was wearing orange eye protection, the market district as a whole was a clear shade of the same color. The other 3 members of his team were to meet him at headquarters. Minato Sensei would be present, and the 2 of them would embark on a C-rank mission. He was in a good mood, but that thought in his mind made him happy all over again. Common sense overcame his euphoria, though it was difficult to resist breaking into song and dancing in the middle of the road. He was quite early because the Uchiha had not slept at all the night before at home. As soon as he had returned, his father had also shed a tear, and his mother had sobbed and embraced him. Obito had tried to faint with joy on his own bed in his own room after consuming the heaviest meal he could manage. Sleep, however, just would not come. It was enlightening to think about the mission, the world outside of Konoha, and the girl he would be traveling with. He turned and waited as he stepped up to the headquarters main entrance. Soon his teammates would arrive. Kakashi and Rin took great satisfaction in the fact that the Genins were never late. From what little he had seen of the new kid, he also appeared to be responsible. All I want is to get to know him well enough to have him as a friend. To his left, he heard footsteps. 3 different sets of footsteps. He turned to see the 3 approaching him, Goku and Kakashi obviously arguing about something. "No, you imbecile," said old gray hair, who never held back. "I think your swordsmanship has actually gotten worse with time." "Oh really?" the child asked with an equally aggressive demeanor. "I'll definitely make you eat those words, moron. Guess who got a nick on your face yesterday? Oh, this guy right here." Kakashi moaned and said, "Oh, come on." He stopped suddenly when he realized what he had just said and who he had said it to. That was the biggest lucky coincidence of all time, beating even the time I got my hands on a free copy of Icha Icha in the mail the other day, he said. The imaginary ceiling had been touched by Nohara Rin's eyebrows. With disbelieving eyes, she called out to her fellow genin, "Kakashi-kun, please tell me that you are not into that sort of dubious, unpleasant crap." As he watched his opponent falter out his denial, Obito suppressed a laugh. "I'm not a masked creep who reads teen fantasy dating books, that's for sure. Yes, sir." 2 by 2, they ascended the stairs. They moved as if they were in a good mood. Outside the door was Namikaze Minato. He turned the handle, knocked courteously, and went in, gesturing to the 4 teenagers to follow him. In addition to Sarutobi and the village elders, the eerie presence of Danzo in the room was enough to chill Goku to the bone. "I hope I never get on his bad side, man. However, I don't really have any control over that anymore, do I?" The mission scroll was already in Hiruzen's grasp. He appeared to be very serious. Even Minato's expression, which was usually a casual smirk, was solemn and respectful. The Sandame cleared his throat and started briefing them. "So, this is your first C-rank mission as a genin unit. Before I proceed to brief you about the details of your assignment, I must commend you for keeping your promise. Taking on a challenge such as yours, and still completing the entire D-rank scroll in a matter of a month is indeed impressive." After a brief pause, he grinned at them. He unrolled the scroll and started reading out a specific entry. "Anyway," he added, "the mission that you will be receiving is quite the standard higher than your usual assignments. Your mission is to attend to some animal threats a neighboring village is getting. It seems like the carnivores there are extremely aggressive and that 5 people have already died at their hands." As evidence of her gender, Rin gasped. The others just nodded and listened. "You will have to go investigate the scene, and exterminate the threat. This is one of the more difficult C-ranked missions in the scroll, but I believe your team, with Minato as your leader," he said while staring at the yellow-haired Jonin, "can achieve this too with relative ease. You must prepare to leave at the earliest. I presume an hour will be enough. Get ready and meet up again at the village gate. I shall send word of your departure." Obito boasted, "I think they'll be a piece of cake, once more." Knowing that the Uchiha had a tendency to talk endlessly about his fantasies about how strong he was, Kakashi, Rin, and Minato didn't give a fuck. Goku, however, appeared to be absorbing everything the idiot was saying as if it were gospel. "I'll just use my fancy move, and they'll be begging for mercy in no time." "Really, Obito?" Kakashi rolled his eyes at Goku's credulity and grabbed the Saiyan by the ear before he started fangirling in the middle of the road. They were eager to leave and stood at the gate with their knapsacks already on their shoulders. Minato was bidding Kushina farewell for the last time, promising to come back early, hugging her, and all that cutesy, romantic nonsense. It dawned on the gray-haired teenager that Goku was not the only simpleton among them. He let them both know how annoyed he was by coughing loudly. In fact, Kushina flushed. A blue moon seemed to have decided to do a jig all of a sudden. She sprang away, unable to contain her embarrassment any longer, pushing her significant other away towards his bored team. "I didn't know she could do that. However, I suppose miracles do happen because Obito hasn't yet fallen headfirst into a pit." They quickly hefted their bags and departed after notifying the 2 Chunins at the gate and recording their departure information in the journal. After those dull farewells, the spirit of adventure was coming back. Kakashi accelerated, and he was relieved to see that Obito was barely keeping up with the others. On their way to the village of the snow, they darted through the trees like a group of drug-addled monkeys. As they became aware of how boring pedal travel was, their enthusiasm gradually subsided. Their trip was generally quiet and uneventful, with the exception of a hilarious incident in which Goku slipped on a branch and struck his head on the next tree trunk. That is, until it wasn't. Minato abruptly stopped them less than an hour after they had begun. He signaled the genins to stop as they gathered around him. Kurt gave brief instructions, saying, "I sense chakra in that direction, a couple clicks away. I do not think these are friendly men. Expect things to get messy." Every teenager except one nodded, instantly grasping the military jargon. Goku simply played the role of the fool who eventually kills himself, looking perplexed. With a question in his eyes, Minato examined each one individually. "Have you gotten that?" Obito, Kakashi, and Rin all nodded in agreement. Goku nearly blurted out how perplexed he was, but he restrained himself at the last second by recalling Minato's original directions. A few more seconds went by. Now everyone could feel the chakra getting closer. There was no denying that these men were strong. Chunins, at least. Multiple. The group moved into defensive positions, with Rin hiding on a branch, Obito scuttling into the undergrowth, and Kakashi hiding behind a tree. Goku's hair stood on end because of the serious tone of their actions. How powerful are these guys? Minato looked him in the eye and said, "You are going to act as bait, Goku. Get it?" Goku nodded, unsure if he would engage in combat or not. Clear instructions sailed miles above the bewildered Saiyan's head. "Just stay put and let them come to you. You are to act as a diversion, so that we can ambush them while their backs were turned." Unlike the in-depth instruction the aspiring genins received at the academy, he had never trained for circumstances like these. The Jonin interpreted his stupid nod as understanding. "All right. Let's do this." Minato vanished in a flash. Goku was totally bewildered as he stood there. He stood on the forest floor, feeling all whiny and abandoned, and all the other negative emotions that come with being betrayed, as the incoming chakra approached. He was therefore standing in a corner, pouting like a child, when the Kumogakure shinobi arrived. There was initially a moment of dismay since the four Chunin didn't understand why the Konoha child was standing with his back to them, pouting maniacally, his lips visible from that position. But it cleared quickly. Despite all the flimsy appearances of peace talks and cowardly, passive treaties, the tension between the villages had not subsided. They tightened their pincer grip on Goku, who appeared completely unconcerned by the danger that had been placed upon him. Silent as the night, they leapt. There was something strange about the whole thing, even as they closed in. The child was not responding at all. In fact, it appeared as though he was deliberately ignoring them. They all thought at once, "I will never again set foot on Konoha territory. There are a lot of psychopaths there." Goku turned, thumbing the hilt of his sword as he ducked under the first shinobi's attack, his eye glinting suddenly. He flicked the sword up as the second one came closer, adding mass as it emerged from the sheath. With devastating results, the hilt of the extremely heavy blade struck the advancing Chunin's chin, sending him reeling back, clutching his broken lower jaw in agony. The others took a defensive stance after noticing Goku's unexpected offensive. Before they knew it, the three other genins were on them, with Obito, as usual, stumbling and falling like the embarrassment he was. Rin kicking out at the exposed back of another, and Kakashi dropping silently and effectively to break the first one's neck. As Obito struggled to stand up, Goku watched in growing alarm. The enemy was on him, ready to attack. After just a single second, Minato's specially crafted kunai had him on his knees. Not wanting to look like a complete loser, Obito flinched for a moment before hurriedly getting to his feet. Standing over their respective victims, Kakashi and Rin looked extremely proud. Goku thought to himself, lowering his security for a moment, "Looks like the extra training we did helped a lot, huh?" Goku, Kakashi, Rin, Minato cried out, "Look out!" The three became aware of the effects of the Kawarimi no Jutsu as they began and turned to face their opponents once more. Near them were three wooden logs, one of which was severely damaged by Goku's earlier vicious attack. They didn't have time to explore. The first person ambushed was Kakashi. He swung around with a snarl. I assume, just managing to sidestep the Kumogakure Chunin's powerful, kunai wielding arm. He retreated a step and adopted a passive posture, allowing the conflict to end in a heated standoff. He grabbed his sword from behind him and pulled it out, snapping his neck in the process. After glancing once at the blade, his opponent turned his attention back to the genin's eyes. The man then removed two uniquely shaped tools from his flak jacket after pausing to assess his opponent. They resembled the hand blades that Asuma use. He poured chakra into them and started to sharpen the edge until it shone and released the high-pitched, grating whine of air molecules rubbing against one another. At the sound, Kakashi scowled. To him, anything that made him think of his classmates was forbidden. Furthermore, his opponent revealed a goatee that made him appear completely dim-witted when he lowered his face mask. Kakashi shook his head, his disappointment difficult to hide. This guy is so annoying. He took a stuttering step to the left and launched an immediate offensive. The sooner he put this annoyance to rest, the sooner he could go assist Rin. Their backbreaking training under Kushina and the recent run of missions had had an impact. As he quickly dispatched the Chunin, Kakashi observed the shift in his footwork and sword movements and was taken aback by the lack of wasted motion in his swings. He had also been improved by Goku. Before the man's body had even had time to hit the ground, he had drawn the sword, cleaned the blood off, and put it back in its sheath, killing his opponent with a casual but lethal thrust between his floating ribs. Kakashi silently prayed for the fool's soul while looking down with sympathy. Abruptly, he looked up and saw what he had been doing. He waited for a moment, his face flushed, looking around for anyone who might have witnessed his tender moment. He sighed in relief when he found none. He thought angrily, freaking retard tail. Boy, if I'm not careful, you're going to make me into some gay loser. The two others had surrounded Rin and Goku as well. Even though Minato was still far away, he was essentially worthless in this situation because he also had to deal with Obito's complaining. As the enemy circled around, looking for a weakness in their defense and preparing to attack, the two were pressed close together. Back. Back. Rin said to her teammate in a whisper, "You know what to do, right?" Goku nodded, his lips clenched in resolve. Makoto and Kushina were the ones circling in on them during the dozens of times they had practiced in this situation. Out of the 3 teams that could have passed that one, only Kakashi and Rin had done so, and only after 10 dreadfully unsuccessful attempts. Having been killed by a wooden blunt training kunai dipped in red paint, Goku and Rin, as well as Goku with Kakashi, had never been able to avoid getting a red mark on their chests. In that case, Goku remembered what the successful combo had accomplished. He ducked abruptly and waited for Rin's body to cross over his own. He grabbed her by the waist with his arms and raised her into the air, sending her flying in the direction of one of the 2 assailants. The other guy approached from behind, almost as they had anticipated, assuming Goku would be helpless in that awkward, crooked position. Rin abruptly turned, exposing her palms to Goku as she continued to fly. The Saiyan knew that position from countless other training exercises, but it wasn't what he had in mind. After letting her go alone, Kakashi used his kunai skill to repel Makoto's advances, removing the wooden blade from her grasp like a flower from a tree. Goku had to improvise because he knew he didn't yet have that kind of fine control over his blade. Rin had previously defused Minato's Rasengan, he remembered. Recalled a training task that Kushina had required Rin to complete. It had to do with chakra reflection. He met her gaze and gave her a subtle nod. She nodded in agreement as well. Goku was aware of his obligations. She would handle everything. He prepared 2 Rasengans in his hands, combining them as Rin planted her feet in an enemy's face, using his strong abdominal muscles to keep his torso off the ground. He had finally given the technique a name after an entire hour of contemplation. Goku aimed his Rasen Kamehameha directly at Rin as she raised her face. Platform, sending the beam hurtling toward her extended arms. Obito's shocked eyes grew wide. That move was something he had never seen before, and it seemed to him that Goku had abruptly changed his mind and attacked his own teammate. Obito didn't even think twice because Rin was that teammate. He was determined and ran for her. To hell with the repercussions of having a second mass of swirling chakra to spiral into his torso once more, he was going to block it with his own body. That last one hurt, man. The shorter, slower Uchiha would never make it there because Minato had not made an attempt to get there. Rin suddenly made a crazy move as he stumbled, his mind racing with the increasing fear that he would lose the one person who meant the most to him. As the beam got closer, he noticed a mirror of chakra form in front of her palms. She aimed the mirror and prepared for impact, concentrating through a slick of perspiration that threatened to blind her. The destructive power of 2 Rasengans plus more was possessed by Goku's Rasen Kamehameha. Goku grinned. Rin would survive, he knew. Rin turned the impact into motion and flew backwards, slamming the blue heel of her sandal into the other opponent's face and sending him crashing into the closest tree as well. The chakra beam reflected directly off the flat surface she had created and plowed straight into the approaching enemy Chunin. As Kakashi and Obito watched with amazement etched on their faces, Rin executed a very elegant follow. Threw from the kick and landed cleanly on her feet. Those planks had been very helpful, and Goku got himself up off the ground without using his hands. Rin didn't even look up as she raised her arm. Goku approached and gave them a big high five to wrap up their teamwork. Kakashi was reluctantly impressed as well. They do appear cool at the moment, huh? Minato hurriedly looked at the vital signs and condition of the 4 shinobi that had been defeated. They didn't want them to suddenly come back. He signaled the genins to search the others while he looked through the 4th one's jacket for information. Oddly enough, None of them looked particularly prepared for the kind of recon mission they seemed to be on. They had very few provisions and an oddly low level of equipment, and this was deep in Konoha territory. Minato was astounded by how militarily unprepared the other villages were in comparison to the Hidden Leaf. Though it had had the least impact on Konoha, the Second Shinobi War had cost everyone dearly. He approached the fourth, the only member of the group who had not yet been killed. He was simply unconscious, and profoundly so. He would need at least 12 hours to recuperate, and after that, he had no idea how he would support himself. The only thing that war did was destroy. It never produced anything positive. Someone needs to restore peace to these areas once more, he thought. I'm telling you, it was planned. Minato snapped his head around as he heard Goku's yell. The four were finished, and Obito was using this moment to vent his frustrations to Goku. Shut up. Goku and Rin tried to calm Obito down, but he was obviously incensed. He paused as he realized what he was about to say. What if that rosin thing had hit her? Huh? Would you have healed her? Would you have erased those scars once they appeared, right on her? Rin also flushed, so Kakashi decided to take advantage of the situation and put an end to it. He started off by saying, if you hadn't made a fool of yourself, you scatterbrained Nimrod, as if he were reading from a grocery list. They wouldn't have been in that situation in the first place. So calm them titties, and shut the fuck up. Your voice is beginning to give me a headache. Obito remained silent despite his red face, but his eyes were still glowing with indignant protest. With a serious expression, Goku approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. He began by saying, I assure you, I wasn't trying to hurt her. Obito appeared to comprehend. His ire had been subdued by Kakashi's uninteresting declaration of the obvious. He gave Goku a tight-lipped grimace and nodded.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.